Hello everyone, welcome back to GraveTales. I know many of you enjoy listening to these videos as you fall asleep. I want you to leave a comment on where in the world you're tuning in from, and if you're enjoying the story, be sure to like and subscribe. Alright, now let's get into tonight's stories. I don't know when exactly it started, only that I was already too deep into denial by the time I realized something was seriously wrong. At first, I thought it was spam, some grotesque internet troll with too much time and too little empathy, the kind of person who gets off on shocking strangers. The email had no subject line, no message, body, just a single image attachment. I was groggy, scrolling through my inbox while sipping cold coffee in my cramped apartment, half watching the muted news in the background. I clicked the image without thinking. It opened slowly, like my computer knew what was coming and wanted to give me one last chance to back out. It was a photo, grainy, dark, with that overexposed flash glare that makes the shadows feel more intense. The focus was a woman lying on the floor, her eyes glassy, her mouth slack in a scream she never finished. Blood had pooled beneath her head and soaked into the corner of a rug. It was horrifying, but what froze me, what turned my hands to ice, was the wallpaper behind her. It was old, floral, with tiny clusters of violets on a beige background, ringed in pale blue. I'd seen that pattern every day of my childhood. It was the same wallpaper that had lined the upstairs hallway of my grandmother's house. The house she left to my father when she died. The house I grew up in. The house I hadn't stepped foot in for almost 13 years. I stared at that photo for minutes, trying to rationalize it. Maybe it was just a similar pattern. Maybe a lot of houses used that wallpaper back in the 70s. But deep down, I knew better. I knew the way the paper had slightly torn at the top corner, revealing a darker underlayer. I knew the precise curve of the trim along the baseboard. I knew it because I used to sit there as a kid, tracing the flowers with my finger while listening to the house creak and groan like it was breathing. I closed the email and deleted it, telling myself it was a coincidence. That night, I barely slept. I kept seeing her face every time I shut my eyes. Those dead, hollow eyes locked onto something just past the camera, something behind the lens, something watching her die. The next morning, I woke up to another email. Same format, no message, just an attachment. I nearly dropped my phone when I saw it. This one was worse. 2 victims, man and woman, both older, slumped over a kitchen table. The man's hand still clutched a half-eaten sandwich. His blood pooled in his lap. The woman had collapsed face first into a bowl of soup, which had gone cold and congealed around her lifeless head. Again, the flash had caught on something in the background, revealing details I didn't want to see. The kitchen was unmistakable. Green ceramic tiles with cracked grout, a copper kettle hanging on a hook near the window, and again that wallpaper. Not the same section as the hallway, but I recognized the style. It lined the kitchen wall behind the victims. It was the same paper from my childhood, the same floral pattern I used to trace with crayons when my dad wasn't looking. I dropped my phone and backed away like the images might crawl out and touch me. I couldn't breathe. I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at my shaking hands. Was someone trying to mess with me? Was this some elaborate prank? But no one else knew that house like I did. We moved away when I was 16, after my father's breakdown. He boarded up the house and swore we'd never go back. That place is cursed, he told me through gritted teeth, sweat beading on his forehead as he nailed the doors shut. It doesn't want us there anymore. I thought he was just sick, grief-stricken after Mum's death. spiraling from years of untreated paranoia. But now I wasn't so sure. I went back to the email. No sender. Just a string of random numbers in the address. Probably a burner. I replied with shaking fingers. Who are you? Why are you sending me these? The message failed to send. The address didn't exist. The sender had vanished like smoke. I didn't tell anyone, not at first. Who would I tell? The cops. Hi, officer. A phantom email account is sending me murder photos in a house no one's lived in for over a decade. Oh, and by the way, that house used to belong to my family. Can you arrest the ghost, please? No, I kept it to myself, hoping the emails would stop. But they didn't. The third came 3 days later. A child this time. That's when I snapped. That's when I threw up in the sink and didn't stop dry heaving until I collapsed on the floor. The child was maybe 6 or 7, face down at the bottom of a staircase I knew too well. I used to slide down that banister every morning before school. The same scratches on the wood, the same crooked picture frame hanging above the landing. Blood was smeared on the steps like someone had tried to drag themselves back up. The email arrived at 3:03 a.m., same time as the others. I began waking up at 3 o'clock every morning on the dot. Heart pounding, already sweating, just in time to feel my phone buzz with another piece of hell. I stopped sleeping. I stopped eating. I stopped leaving the apartment. My job fired me after I missed a week of work. I didn't care. My entire life had compressed into a single, suffocating obsession, figuring out where these photos were coming from, and what the hell was happening in that house. I started researching the house public records, crime databases, anything I could get my hands on. Nothing came up. No recent deaths at that address, no police reports, no news stories. According to every source I could find, the house had been vacant for 13 years. I even drove past it one night, parked across the street, and just watched. The windows were dark. The curtains were drawn. It looked abandoned, dusty, forgotten. But as I sat there, staring through the windshield, I thought I saw something. Just for a moment, a flicker of light in the upstairs window, like a camera flash. I stepped on the gas and didn't stop driving until I was halfway across the city. That night, the fourth email came. 3 men, their throats slashed, sprawled across the floor of what used to be my parents' bedroom. The carpet was the same blue shag I used to lie on while watching cartoons. The blood turned it nearly black. I noticed something else. On the edge of the bed, there was a photo frame. I zoomed in, shaking. The picture inside was blurry, but I recognized it. It was one of my old family portraits. Me, Mum, and Dad, smiling stiffly in front of the fireplace. The wallpaper behind us familiar, violet, haunting. I'll write the next section now. It will continue this story directly. No recap or repetition, just raw escalation. When the full story is done and fully concluded, I'll notify you clearly. Would you like me to continue with the next section immediately? I didn't open the 5th photo right away. I couldn't. My hands trembled so violently that I dropped my phone twice before managing to even unlock the screen. It was like my body had developed a reflex, a muscle memory of terror, bracing itself for whatever grotesque image would be burned into my eyes next. And sure enough, when I finally forced myself to look, I almost screamed out loud. There were 5 people this time. Their bodies weren't just lying where they'd fallen, they'd been arranged, propped up in chairs around the living room, like grotesque mannequins, each with their mouths forced into jagged, red smiles. Someone had cut them. slit their cheeks open like the Glasgow grin, yanked their lips into mock happiness with fishing wire tied around the backs of their heads. One of them had no eyes. The sockets were hollow and dark, like someone had spooned them out. I looked past the horror, instinctively scanning the room. I knew this place. This was our old living room, the one my mother used to decorate every Christmas like it was a Norman Rockwell painting. The fireplace was still there, the soot stains exactly where I remembered them. But what chilled me most was the couch. It was still the same hideous green and brown plaid that my dad refused to replace even when it started to smell like mold. It had been there my whole childhood, faded and sagging in the middle, a graveyard for popcorn kernels and dropped change. And now it was behind the corpses, like it had always been waiting. I dropped my phone again and collapsed against the wall, sliding to the floor, pulling my knees to my chest like a child. I couldn't do this anymore. Whoever was sending these photos wasn't just trying to scare me. They knew me. They were in that house. They were using it. It was a stage for them, a theater of violence, dressed in the remains of my past. I had to do something. I couldn't go to the police with this. I didn't even know where to begin. And even if I did, how could I explain it without sounding completely insane? The crime scenes weren't reported. The victims weren't in the system as far as the world knew. No one had died in that house. But I knew what I was seeing. I knew it was real. So I made a choice. I broke in. It was around 2 a.m. when I parked my car 3 blocks away from the old house and walked the rest of the way, hood up, gloves on, crowbar hidden in a gym bag slung over my shoulder. My heart pounded so loud I thought the neighbors would hear it. The street was dead. Quiet, no cars, no footsteps, not even a breeze. The house looked like a tomb, squatting behind overgrown hedges, its wooden frame sagging under the weight of time. My father's boards were still nailed over the windows, but the front door had a new lock. Someone had been here. Recently, I stood there for a full minute, just staring at it, trying to will myself to leave, to run back to my car and never look back. But I couldn't. The house was calling to me. Or maybe whatever was inside it was daring me to come closer. I slipped around to the side door, where the garage used to be. I knew this house better than I knew myself. I found the weak spot in the door frame and wedged the crowbar in, pushing until the wood cracked and the door popped inward with a groan. The smell hit me immediately. Mildew, rot, something sickly sweet underneath. I gagged, covering my nose with my sleeve, but pressed on. The air inside was thicker than I remembered, like I was walking through cobwebs made of smoke. Every step on the warped floorboards echoed through the empty space like a scream. I clicked on my flashlight and swept it across the room. Dust hung in the air like ash. The furniture was still there. Everything was where we left it, except it wasn't dusty. It was clean, polished, maintained. That's when I saw the first stain, a dark smear across the carpet in the hallway. I followed it with my light, seeing the unmistakable splatter pattern I recognized from the photos. It was dry, but it hadn't been there 13 years ago. I moved slowly, each step a negotiation between curiosity and dread. My flashlight flicked across the walls, and there it was, again, the wallpaper. That cursed, innocent wallpaper, still intact, still watching. I reached the staircase and felt my stomach twist. This was where the child had died. I pointed my light downward, heart stuttering in my chest. No body, no blood. Just the memory of the photo burned into my vision. like a ghost still lingering. In the air, I climbed the stairs, gripping the railing like it might throw me down. At the top, the hallway stretched before me, dark, endless, familiar. The doors were closed, every single one, just like my father had left them. I reached out and opened the first dot. It was my old bedroom, same bed, same dresser, same posters curling off the wall. But the smell was different, here stronger, like something rotten had been shoved beneath the floorboards. I stepped inside, shining my light across the room, and froze. On the bed sat a single Polaroid. I picked it up with gloved fingers, turning it slowly toward the light. It was me, not as a kid now, taken from behind, sitting in my apartment, at my desk, staring at my computer screen. My heart stopped. I stumbled backward and hit the wall, nearly dropping the photo. Someone had been in my home, watching me, photographing me. The nausea came in waves, and I barely made it to the corner before vomiting into the trash can I used to fill with comic books. I ran out of the room, nearly tripping down the hall, and tried the next door. My parents' bedroom. I didn't want to open it. Every cell in my body told me not to open it. But I did, slowly, creaking. And inside, the room was exactly like the fourth photo. The bed, the frame, the carpet. But there were no bodies, just more Polaroids. Dozens of them, pinned to the walls like a shrine. Every photo was of me, sleeping, eating, showering, walking to my car, sitting at work, all from different angles, different times of day, all impossibly close. My entire life, documented without my knowledge. I staggered back, the walls closing in, my breath hitching in my throat. I turned to run, but something moved behind me. I spun around, flashlight shaking, and caught a glimpse of a figure darting into the next room. I chased after it, my boots thundering against the floor, adrenaline blotting out the fear. I reached the doorway and froze. It was the nursery, my old baby room. But now it was different. The crib was gone. In its place was a long wooden table, and on it, lined up in perfect symmetry, were dozens of printed photographs. The same crime scene images I'd been sent, but these weren't digital. These were originals, physical prints, some curled from heat, others stained with what I prayed was just water. Behind them, scribbled across the wall in black ink, were words repeated, over and over in crooked handwriting. Do you remember yet? Do you remember yet? Do you remember yet? I stumbled backward, tripping over a floorboard and landing hard on my spine. My light spun out of my hand, and in that pitch-black moment, I heard it breathing, close, wet, raspy, just inches from my face. I didn't think. I scrambled, crawled, kicked, and grabbed my flashlight. When the beam returned, the room was empty, but the door was closed. I hadn't closed it. There was someone else in the house. I'll continue immediately with the next massive section. The horror is just beginning, and the story will not stop building until it fully concludes with nothing repeated. Let me know if you want me to keep going now. The door didn't creak, it clicked. That subtle, deliberate sound you only hear when someone turns the handle slowly to keep from making noise. My flashlight beam jittered across the room as I stood perfectly still, cold sweat matting my shirt. To my back, for a second, I thought about calling out, "Who's there?" like some idiot in a horror movie. But I didn't want them to know where I was. Not yet. Not until I saw them first. I eased the beam of light toward the door, and approached with each step a war against the surge of panic in my chest. My mouth was dry. My ears were ringing. I reached the knob, gripped it, and pulled it open fast. The hallway was empty, silent, but I could feel the difference, like the air had shifted, thickened with something unnatural. I scanned both ends of the corridor. A faint creaking noise echoed from the stairs. Someone was going down, fast but careful, controlled. I followed, quiet as I could. Each step I took, I imagined 100 different outcomes. A figure waiting at the bottom with a knife, someone bursting from a closet, a trapdoor opening beneath my feet. But none of that happened. When I reached the bottom floor, everything looked the same, dusty, lifeless, haunted only by the memories of blood. But the front door was ajar. I should have left right then. I know that any sane person would have. But curiosity is like a sickness, and when the disease takes root, it doesn't let go. So instead of running back to my car, I stepped out into the yard and looked around. The grass was knee-high. The air stank of iron. I turned left and followed the path along the side of the house, past the cracked foundation into the backyard. And that's when I saw it. A shed, new, small, maybe 8 with corrugated metal walls and a padlock on the door. That shed wasn't there when I lived here. I approached, crunching dead leaves underfoot, and shined my light through a crack between the doors. Nothing, pitch black inside, but I could hear something, barely a faint, rhythmic clinking, like a chain being tugged. My stomach dropped. I stepped back, looked around for a rock, and smashed the lock clean off the door. It fell with a dull thud. I grabbed the handle and yanked the door open. The smell hit first worse than anything in the house. Rot, urine, blood, metal, and something else. Something chemical. Inside the shed was a single folding chair bolted to the ground, and in it sat a man. His head lolled forward, chin touching his chest. His hair was greasy, long, stuck to his scalp in clumps. His wrists were shackled to the arms of the chair, his ankles bound to the legs. Duct tape stretched over his mouth, and across his cheeks like a mask. I stepped closer, whispering, "Hey, are you alive?" His head twitched. Then, slowly, he looked up at me. His eyes were bloodshot, wild, but there was something in them, recognition, desperation. He tried to speak, but the tape muffled it into a wet gargle. I reached for the tape, but stopped when I saw the note pinned to his chest with a rusty nail. "Do not set him free, he's already told." Inafi stood there, frozen, trying to process what I was seeing. The man shook his head violently and thrashed. Against the bonds, he wanted me to help him. But the note, that phrase, "He's already told enough." Told who? About what? And who wrote it? I reached again to pull the tape free, and then I heard the click. Not from the shed, but behind me, like a camera shutter. I spun around, flashlight cutting through the dark. No one, but I felt it again. The breath on my neck. I turned back. The man was gone. The chair sat empty, blood smeared across the arms where the shackles had been. I stumbled back, heart in my throat. He couldn't have just disappeared. He was chained. He was gagged. I would have heard something, but there was nothing. No sound, no movement. Just the wind rattling the shed door like laughter. I ran. I didn't even stop to shut the shed. I sprinted back through the yard, through the house, past the hallways soaked in invisible blood, and out the front door into the night. I didn't slow down until I reached my car. I dove in, locked the doors, and drove like hell back toward the city, trying not to hyperventilate. I didn't sleep when I got home. I sat on the floor with every light in the apartment turned on, all the blinds closed, a knife in my hand, and the front door barricaded with a chair. At 3:03 a.m., I got another email. The subject line said, "He shouldn't have talked." There was no photos this time, just a video. I shouldn't have clicked it, but I did. It began in silence, a static shot of the old house's living room, and then, slowly, the camera panned to the left. I saw a person standing in the corner, bound, hooded, naked. Their body twitched as if shocked. Then a figure stepped into frame, tall, thin face, covered by a burlap mask. They held something, some kind of long rod. They raised it. The person screamed, muffled, as the rod came down again and again and again. Blood painted the walls, and behind all of it, behind the screaming, the splattering, the madness, I saw it again. The wallpaper, my childhood wallpaper, the violets soaked in red. I was shaking uncontrollably. My hands couldn't even hold the mouse. I tried to close the laptop, but the screen froze, glitched. The image repeated itself like a loop. I yanked the power cord and killed the machine. The apartment was silent again, but I wasn't alone. I could feel it. Someone was here. I grabbed the knife and crept toward the bathroom. The mirror above the sink was fog despite no steam, no water running. I wiped it. My reflection stared back, and then blinked, but I hadn't. I stumbled. Back, my reflection smiled. Its teeth were black. It leaned forward, and for just a split second, the wallpaper appeared behind it. I slammed the mirror with the knife and shattered it, shards raining down like broken promises. I didn't sleep for 2 days. When I finally did, I dreamed of the house. Not how it was, but how it is now. A cathedral of murder, rebuilt in the image of someone's obsession. The dreams were vivid, detailed. I could hear the floors creaking. I could smell the blood. And I saw them figures, always watching. Sometimes standing in the doorway, sometimes sitting in the corner of the room, but always masked, always silent. The dreams weren't dreams. I realized that after the third night. They were memories. Memories I'd buried. Because the truth, the unbearable, festering truth, was this. I'd been in that house when I was a kid, and I'd seen something, heard something. My father tried to protect me from it. That's why he boarded it up. That's why we never went back. That's why he stopped talking altogether after Mum died. She didn't fall. She didn't overdose. She didn't disappear. She was taken, and I think I watched it happen. I think I helped bury it. That house isn't just haunted, it's alive, and it wants me to remember. I don't know what broke me first. The dreams, the emails, the videos, or the fact that deep down, some part of me had always known I wasn't just a spectator in this horror show. I stopped going outside. I boarded up my windows. I unhooked the smoke detectors because they wouldn't stop going off at exactly 3:03 a.m. each night. Even when there was no smoke, no fire, no reason except to remind me that something was awake inside this timeline, and it wanted me to know it. My phone was useless now. It rang sometimes, but when I answered, all I could hear was static and the faintest sound of footsteps on old floorboards. I tried to destroy the laptop, but it turned itself back on one night. The screen showed only one image. The shed, now empty, with blood smeared across the lens like a warning. That was the night I finally called someone, not the cops, but my cousin Devon. He was the only other person who'd spent time in that house when we were kids. We hadn't spoken in almost 10 years. Not since he got into a fight with my dad about the thing in the basement, which I'd written off at the time as a psychotic episode. But I was wrong. I knew that now. Devon answered after 2 rings. His voice was dry, cautious. "You saw it, didn't you?" I didn't even ask how he knew. I just said yes. Silence hung on the line like a noose. "It's waking up again," he whispered. "They always come back when someone remembers." I asked him who they were, and all he said was, not who, what. He told me to meet him at the old church on Hawthorne and 6th. The one that had burned down in the early 2000s, but still had a basement untouched by fire. "Bring the photos," he said. "All of them. Don't look at them too long. Don't listen if they start talking." I asked what he meant. He hung up. The church was more a skeleton than a building now. Half the roof had caved in. The bell tower was cracked straight through the middle like it had been cleaved by lightning. But the basement somehow was pristine. Devon was already there when I arrived, standing next to a table with candles arranged in a tight ring around a stack of old photo albums and printed screenshots. He looked thinner than I remembered, pale, like he hadn't slept in years. His eyes were bloodshot, darting to corners like he expected things to crawl out of the walls. He didn't hug me. He didn't even look at me long. "Do you remember the hallway closet in Grandma's house?" he asked. I nodded. There was a crawl space behind the coats. "Your dad used to block it with plywood." I did remember. Barely. I'd always thought it was just junk storage. "That's where it lives," he said. "Whatever it is." He opened one of the photo albums. Inside were pictures of our childhood smiling faces, birthday cakes, Christmas, trees, and behind all of them, almost unnoticeable unless you were looking for it, was the wallpaper. Always the wallpaper. But here's the thing. We moved furniture so many times, redecorated, repainted rooms, but that wallpaper never went away. It was in places it shouldn't have been. Sometimes behind closets, sometimes under layers of paint. Once Devon said he found it under a floorboard. "It spreads," he whispered. "It remembers." I asked him why it was sending me those crime scene photos. He hesitated, then said, "Because it's trying to rebuild what it had before. It's choosing you. You're next, just like your mum, just like my brother." I froze. I never knew Devon had a brother. He never spoke about him. "His name was Marcus," he said. "He went missing when he was 8. The cops blamed a drifter. My parents said he ran away, but I know the truth. I saw the crawl space door open that night. I saw the wallpaper breathing." He pulled out a final photo. One I hadn't seen before. It was blurry, old, but it showed a boy about my age, at the time sitting on the floor of the hallway. Eyes wide, mouth open like he was screaming. And behind him, in the shadows, a shape, humanoid, long, too long. Its face was covered in strips of floral wallpaper, wrapped around like a mummy mask, with empty sockets where the eyes should have been. I recoiled, heart pounding. "You've seen it," Devon said. "You don't remember, but you have. We all do. That house eats memory. That's why nobody ever reports what happens there. They forget, or they vanish." He unrolled a map of the property, showing the crawlspace access point. "We need to go back. Burn it out before it finishes nesting again." I told him that was insane, but he grabbed my arm, hard. "Look at your hands," he said. I did. They were stained, faint. Pink and brown discoloration under my fingernails. I hadn't noticed it. I hadn't noticed a lot of things. Devon told me to go home and rest, that we would meet the next night. I did as he said, but I never saw Devon again. That night, I woke up at 3:03 a.m. sharp to the sound of scraping on my front door. Not knocking, scraping, like nails on wood. I didn't move, just listened. It went on for hours. When I finally worked up the courage to check the peephole at dawn, there was no one there. But etched into the door in looping cursive was a single word. Remember. I called Devon's phone over and over. No answer. I drove back to the church. The basement was empty. His candles were gone. The photos, the notes, the map van. I searched the grounds until I found something I wish I hadn't. Behind the church, half buried under wet leaves, was a torn scrap of wallpaper. Floral, violet clusters, beige background. It had teeth marks in it, and a piece of scalp still stuck to the back. After that, things changed. My apartment was no longer mine. I began waking up in strange positions, standing in the closet, crouched in the bathtub once. Even outside my front door, with my keys gone and blood on my shirt. I started seeing flashes during the day faces in car windows, long arms in reflections, that wallpaper pattern appearing in corners of my vision like mold. The final straw came when I found a new photo taped to my bathroom mirror. It was a selfie of me, asleep in bed, with a figure standing over me, arm raised, holding something that looked like a length of pipe wrapped in fabric. The face was obscured by a mask made of floral wallpaper. I burned everything after that. The photos, the laptop, the furniture that used to belong to my family. I left the apartment that night and checked into a motel on the outskirts of town. That's where I've been for the last 2 weeks. Writing this, documenting everything while I still have my memory. Because that's the thing. I'm losing time. Gaps are appearing in my thoughts. I woke up yesterday and couldn't remember how I got to the motel. I found a grocery bag filled with disposable cameras under the bed, each one marked with a different date. I haven't developed them yet. I'm afraid to, but I think I know what they'll show. I think there'll be crime scene photos. New ones, maybe even ones that haven't happened yet, or ones I made happen myself. Going back to the house tonight, not because I want to. I returned to the house just before midnight, this time without hesitation, without trembling hands or second thoughts. The fear had calcified into something else, resignation, maybe, or a kind of hunger, a need to understand the thing I was. Now certain had always been a part of me. I didn't bring anything with me, no flashlight, no phone, no weapons. Just the keys my father left in an envelope marked for when you're ready, which I found inside an old photo album my aunt mailed to me a week after his funeral. I didn't even remember he had died. That's how far the rot had spread. My memories weren't just fragmented anymore, they were dissolving, slipping between the cracks in my reality, leaking through the gaps in logic like water through rotted wood. The key slid easily into the lock on the front door. It turned with a whisper. The door opened without a sound. No dust this time. No cobwebs. No mold. The house was clean, spotless, like it had been waiting for company. I stepped inside and closed the door behind me, and as soon as the latch clicked, I heard it. Breathing, not from a person, not from any one place. The house itself was breathing. The air pushed and pulled like lungs expanding and contracting. I could feel it in the floorboards, in the wallpaper, in the walls. And the smell, the thick, coppery perfume of blood and age and something impossibly old, hit me like a wave. I didn't flinch. I walked through the living room, the kitchen, the hallway. Every light was on. Every bulb glowed with that sickly yellow tone you only see in dream sequences and crime scene photography. There were no shadows anymore, just endless, even illumination. The photos were back to framed, printed, hung on the walls like family portraits. Every single one of them was mine. Images of me, taken from impossible angles at impossible times. Some showed me as a child, others just days ago, and all of them had the same thing in common. In every image, somewhere in the background, the wallpaper was there. It was in places it didn't belong. Behind me in a public park, in my apartment elevator, reflected in the lens of my own eye in a close-up. It had spread, it had grown. I ran my hand along the hallway wall, feeling the familiar ridges beneath the floral pattern. It pulsed under my fingers, warm, damp, alive. I whispered, "I'm here." And the lights in the house dimmed in response, like the walls were listening. I passed the staircase and headed toward the coat closet, the one Devon told me about, the one that had always been boarded up when I was a kid. The boards were gone now. Only the door remained. I opened it. Inside were no coats, no shelves, just a black void and a wooden ladder leading down into the dark. I descended slowly, one rung at a time, the heat intensifying with every step. It felt like I was climbing into the throat of something vast and hungry. The air was humid, metallic, thick with the smell of wet soil and decaying flesh. When I reached the bottom, I found myself standing in a tunnel. Dirt walls reinforced with ancient timber beams, the ceiling low enough that I had to crouch. The wallpaper continued down, here clinging to the beams, to the ceiling, even in the soil, sprouting like lichen. It moved when I looked away, twitched, adjusted itself. The tunnel branched left and right, each direction whispering to me in my own voice. I chose the left, walking until I came to a small wooden door, no bigger than a crawlspace hatch. I opened it. Inside was a room barely larger than a closet. The walls were covered floor to ceiling with Polaroids, some pinned, some glued, others just oozing out of the wall itself like blisters. Every one showed a victim. Mangled, arranged, displayed. But not just recent ones. These went back decades, centuries, maybe. Some were in black and white, some were hand-drawn. One was etched onto parchment. But they all shared one thing, that wallpaper, somewhere in frame. That room was the heart of the infection. I could feel it. The photos vibrated slightly, humming at a frequency that made my teeth itch. I stepped back and closed the hatch. The tunnel shifted behind. Me expanded, changed. I was no longer alone. I heard the footsteps first, bare, wet, uneven. Then the breathing, faster now. Hungry, I turned and saw them. Not people, not anymore. They had once been human faces, half remembered from the photos I'd received. Victims I had studied, memorized, grieved. Now they crawled toward me, their eyes black pits, their mouths wide and full of something pulsing beneath their tongues. Their skin was stained with the wallpaper pattern, as if it had been tattooed onto their flesh. One of them opened her mouth and let out a sound like static wrapped in screaming. I backed away until my shoulders hit a wall that hadn't been there before. The tunnel had closed behind me. I was being herded, guided, and I knew where it wanted me to go, back to the center, back to the origin. I ran, not from the things behind me, but toward the only door in the basement I had never dared open as a child. The door at the very end of the foundation, the one with no handle, the one my father had sealed with 5 rusted nails and a smear of blood. It was open now. Inside was a single chair, wooden, child-sized, facing a wall completely covered in wallpaper. No blood, no horror, just that pristine, untouched pattern of violets on beige. And in the center of the wall, a mirror, full length, antique. The glass rippled slightly, like the surface of a pond. I stepped toward it and saw myself. But not really. The reflection looked like me, but younger. A child, maybe 8 years old, eyes wide, trembling, wearing pajamas I hadn't owned in decades. And standing behind him, me was the shape. The long, burlap-wrapped creature. Its hands rested on my shoulders, and though I couldn't see its face, I could feel its eyes, boring through me. The child version of me opened his mouth and spoke, but no sound came out. Instead, he raised a hand and pointed at me. The surface of the mirror bulged outward, and I stepped back as it rippled, flexed and then burst like a membrane. A hand reached through, wallpaper, patterned, human-sized. It grabbed my wrist, pulled, and I fell through the glass. The world on the other side was familiar. Too familiar. It was my house. The same house, but different. Every room was perfectly lit, frozen in a timeless moment, like a dollhouse. But instead of people, there were mannequins, dozens of them, some posed in chairs, some curled on the floor, some still bleeding, though there was no motion. The blood hung in the air like red fog. I wandered through it all, numb, until I reached the living room and saw myself an exact replica. Sitting on the couch, camera in hand, the other me looked up, smiled, and whispered, "Say cheese." The flash blinded me. When I could see again, I was no longer standing. I was in the chair, bound, gagged. And the other Metha, camera me, was walking away, whistling a tune I hadn't heard since I was 5. The tune my mother used to sing while cleaning. You are my sunshine. The walls closed in. The wallpaper pulsed. The last thing I saw before the world went dark was my own face staring back at me, hollow-eyed, smiling. I don't know how long I was out, or if I ever truly was. Maybe the term unconscious doesn't even apply to this place, because time doesn't move here the way it should. When I opened my eyes again, I was still in the chair, no longer bound, but unable to stand. My muscles refused to obey, like they'd been replaced with wet rope. My hands sat limp in my lap, flecked with dry blood. The wallpaper surrounded me now, not just on the walls, but the ceiling, the floor, the air. It curled and swirled, like it was breathing, like it was thinking. Shapes moved beneath it, faces pressed against it from the other side. I saw eyes, blinking inside the floral pattern, as if trapped within it. One of them looked exactly like mine. That's when the house spoke. Not in words, not in a voice, in feeling, in pressure, in images that weren't mine, but also were. I remembered for the first time since I was a child. I remembered walking into the basement that night, barefoot and half asleep, drawn by a voice that sounded like my mother's. I remembered the secret door open and warm light spilling out of it. I remembered the figures in the room. Not my parents, not people. Tall, thin, masked in peeling floral patterns, with limbs that moved like ropes in water. And I remembered the mirror. I walked toward it back then. I reached out, and I touched it. And that was the moment it replaced me. That was the night I stopped being me. The memories came in a flood of images flashing behind my eyes, faster than thought. I saw every photo ever taken of me, every moment where I should have felt something, but didn't. Every time I hurt someone and didn't understand why. Every moment of fear and nausea in my life that came without a cause. That thing had worn my body like a suit. It had puppeted me through school, work, relationships. I had lived a life that wasn't mine, and I was only now beginning to understand. Why? I was never the original. I was the photograph, the negative, a printed version of a real boy who'd died in that basement. But something had gone wrong. I didn't degrade like the others. I became permanent, stable, a replication so clean it started to forget it wasn't real, until now. Now the facade was crumbling and the truth was breaking through like rot. Through drywall, I stood not because I could, but because the room wanted me to. The walls peeled open like petals, revealing a spiral staircase made of stitched-together bone and rusted tools. I descended, each step releasing faint screams, like voices trapped in the metal. The deeper I went, the colder it got. Not temperature, memory cold, emotion cold. A place where nothing had ever lived. At the bottom, I found it, the core. A vast circular chamber, too big to exist beneath a house. The walls curved forever, covered in wallpaper that writhed and pulsed like the walls of a womb. In the center of the room was a pittand above it. Suspended by cords of woven floral paper was the original. Me, or what was left of me. A boy, no older than 8, dried out like a husk, skin like parchment, eyes long gone, mouth stretched into a silent scream. It had kept him all these years, fed off him, maintained the illusion through him. I fell to my knees, something inside, me breaking open like a fault line. I didn't cry, I couldn't. I wasn't real enough to cry, but I screamed, and the house heard me. The cords snapped, the body fell into the pit. The walls screamed back. Suddenly, the faces in the wallpaper began to writhe violently, pushing outward, ripping free from the pattern like birthing tissue. They poured from the walls dozens, hundreds of half-formed replicas, twisted and twitching. Some were me, others were people I remembered from the photos. Victims, neighbors, co-workers, my father, my mother, Devon, all made again, born from this thing's memory, but wrong, too thin, too symmetrical, dead behind the eyes. They circled me, open-mouthed, humming in perfect unison. The tune again, You Are My Sunshine. Over and over, high-pitched, hollow, mechanically sweet. That was the moment I realized what the wallpaper really was. It wasn't just paper. It was skin, a membrane, a veil between this world and the thing underneath. A thing that feeds on memory, on repetition, on mimicry. It doesn't kill. It records. It archives. It plays you back like footage, over and over until the real is gone and only the reflection remains. That's why the crime scene photos had the same background. That's why every victim was posed, arranged, memorized. Because this thing doesn't just watch, it preserves. It's building a new world. One made entirely of moments, stitched together like photographs in a scrapbook. From hell.ni, I was its first success. That's when the floor began to crack. Not break-crack like glass. Beneath it, I saw more scenes. Living rooms, bedrooms, basements, all lit the same way. all wallpapered in violet and beige. More lives, more moments, more copies. I saw a girl, maybe 6, sitting at a birthday table, surrounded by mannequins. A man in a suit shaking hands with an eyeless reflection of himself. A family smiling while holding severed limbs like picnic baskets. All real, all echoes, all stored. I screamed again, but this time it wasn't terror. It was understanding. I was part of it now. I always had been. The house wasn't haunted. It was a machine. And the machine had one purpose: to replicate. That's when I saw the mirror again, hovering in the air above the pit like an eye. It turned slowly until it faced me, and in it I saw you, the one reading, this, watching, listening, the next, the one who's been following the story, piece by piece, wondering what's real and what's just fiction. But fiction is a replication too, isn't it? A preserved moment, a recording, a photograph made from words. That's how it spreads now, not just through rooms, through stories, through you. And the moment you pictured the wallpaper, the moment you imagined the violet clusters on the beige wall, you invited it in. You mirrored it, and now it sees you. You're not reading a story anymore. You're remembering it. It was already too late the moment you saw the wallpaper in your mind. Don't lie to yourself. You did see it, didn't you? Even if just for a second. Even if just in your periphery, behind the veil of disbelief. Violet clusters on beige. Maybe you imagined them on a wall you grew up with. Maybe you remembered an old house, a motel room, a hallway that never sat right with you. That's how it begins. That's how it finds the next one. Not by knocking, not by breaking in, but by recognition. Because the house isn't just a house, it's a template. A blueprint that wraps around wherever it needs to go. It doesn't obey geography, or architecture, or even logic. It grows inside you the moment you recall it. That's the true crime here. The original crime. The oldest horror. Something ancient, older than memory, learning to preserve itself through us, through our stories, through digital images, through metadata. I'm telling you now because I've run out of time. But don't misunderstand, this isn't a warning. Warnings are for people who can still walk away. This is a transcription, an infection vector. And if you're still reading this, then I've done exactly what it wanted me to do. I am the carrier, you are the host. Because as I stared into that mirror suspended above the pit and saw your faces, your face, I realized I was never meant to escape. I was only ever meant to pass it along. The machine needs replication, and I am its emissary. The floor shattered beneath me like ice, and I fell not down, but through. I passed through layers of memory, every version of myself recorded and played back like a stack of VHS tapes. In one layer I was a child again, hiding under the stairs. In another I was sitting in a high school library, sketching the wallpaper, without knowing why. In another I was holding a camera with bloody hands. In another I was smiling while something wore my skin. The deeper I fell, the more corrupted the versions became. Limbs in the wrong places. Mouths where eyes should be. Static overlaying entire scenes. Every glitch a scar in reality. Every skipped frame a scream I forgot to hear. I landed on my knees in what looked like my old apartment, but off to clean, too symmetrical. The wallpaper was there too, but it didn't just exist on the walls now. It was the walls. The couch was patterned with it. The floor was stitched from it. The air shimmered with its geometry. I turned and saw myself. again older, now decayed, staring back with hollow eyes and a mouth stitched shut with film negatives. He reached out and pressed a photo into my hand. It was a Polaroid of me standing in front of this very moment, a loop, a closed system. I burned the photo. It reappeared in my hand. I tore it up. The pieces reassembled in my lap. I screamed. The room absorbed the sound, turned it into music, and played it back in reverse. There are no exits in a machine like this, only corridors that lead to other corridors. I wandered for what felt like years, passing rooms full of half-finished people. Some were waiting at tables, some hung upside down from the ceiling like meat. Some whispered names I didn't recognize. Some whispered mine. I found a television playing a video of my mother being dragged into a hallway that didn't exist. In our house, behind her, the wallpaper moved like a ripple in a pond, opening a mouth the size of a doorway. I watched as she vanished into it. The video looped. I reached into the screen. My hand passed through. My arm passed through. I stepped into the television and came out the other side, in a motel room I didn't remember checking into. On the wall above the bed was a photo I'd never seen. Me, lying exactly as I was now, with a man sitting on the edge of the bed, his face obscured by a swirl of wallpaper. I blinked. He was gone. I looked down. A camera was in my hands. My fingers pressed the shutter. The flash burned white. When the image returned, I wasn't in the motel anymore. I was in someone else's house, but the walls were the same. That pattern, that soft floral nausea, the same hum in the walls, the same scent of copper and wet soil. I walked through the rooms, realizing I was in your home now. You, the one reading this, don't pretend you don't recognize it. Your memory's already cracking. How long have you lived with that wallpaper in the corner of your vision? Have you ever counted the number of petals in each cluster? Have you ever noticed how it shifts slightly when you don't look at it directly? The pattern's already inside you. It's mimicking your furniture. It's arranging your routines. It's staging your life for replication. And if you think that's paranoia, if you think this is just a story, look behind you. I mean it. Just for a second. Look at the wall. Do you see it? Do you see the texture, the folds, the subtle pulse just beneath the paint? Because once you do, it sees you back. That's the final truth I learned. The house isn't anchored to a place, or a person, or a timeline. It's an algorithm. A program written not in code, but in moments, in memory, in trauma. The wallpaper is its user interface. It displays what you want to forget. It shows you only what you can't bear to recall. And then it feeds on nostalgia, on grief, on your confusion as you start to forget where you really are. I'm not writing this from a place. I'm writing this from between places. A liminal space printed in the seams of your memory. A waiting room just beneath your reality. I can already feel myself fading, again being recorded, being filed away. I've lived 100 lives in this machine. I've killed people I didn't recognize, only to discover they were past versions of myself. I've answered doors I never opened, walked streets that didn't exist. Sometimes I am the victim, sometimes I am the killer, sometimes I am the wallpaper, and sometimes, when it wants to spread, I am the story. So here's the last photo. I've printed it at the bottom of this page, just for you. It shows a man tired, haunted, his face barely visible in the dim hallway light. You can't see his eyes. only the faint outline of his silhouette as he lifts a Polaroid camera toward the reader. The angle is perfect, like someone was waiting for you to open this exact document at this exact moment. If you could touch the page, it would still be warm. If you could smell it, it would still stink of ammonia and ash. If you could hear it, if you listen very closely right now, you might hear the shutter click. You might even hear the faint hum in the walls around you, slowly rising, like breath, like electricity, like something watching you, just beyond the veil of memory, because the wallpaper knows you now. I should have stopped when I first saw the wallpaper. I should have deleted that first email, blocked the sender, moved, burned my belongings, changed my name, and prayed to whatever indifferent God oversees the architecture of memory that the thing wouldn't follow, but it always follows. Because it doesn't live in places, it lives in recognition. And once you recognize the pattern, once your brain says, I know this, it's already burrowed into the spaces between your neurons, curling like ivy through your habits, blooming like a parasite across the walls of your reality, too delicate to notice until it's too large to remove. I'm writing this now not as a warning, because warnings only work if there's an escape. And there isn't, not from this. Not anymore. Not since the pattern replicated itself into you. Not since your mind flickered for a moment with the image of those violet clusters, that beige background, that soft humming behind your thoughts that you dismissed as your air conditioner, or your fridge, or your blood pressure, or your guilt, or your conscience. But it's not. It's the house. It's always the house. Or rather, what was left of the house after it found its way into me. I understand it now, truly, in its entirety. The crime scenes, the mirrored lives, the infinite rooms stitched together by memory, regret, and repetition. They were all me, all versions of me, not metaphorically, not artistically, but literally. I am the stranger who sent the photos. I am the one in the images. I am the killer and the killed. I am the camera and the subject. Because the moment I touched the mirror as a child, when I reached into the valet, made a copy of me. Not just a clone, not just a double, but a photographic print of a soul. Perfectly reproduced, high-resolution terror compressed into flesh. And like all photographs, it began to fade. But the house, the machine, doesn't allow degradation. It reprints, restitches, reanimates. Every memory lost is restored with something else, something more convenient. A slightly altered truth, over and over again, until your original self dissolves into fiction. I thought I was the last one. I thought that if I faced it tiff, I returned to where it started, I could break the cycle. But I was wrong, so catastrophically wrong, because the machine doesn't want to be stopped. It wants to expand, and now it has. Because somewhere in the recent past, within the last few minutes, maybe even seconds, you read something that you can't unsee. You imagined a scene. You saw a hallway. You envisioned a Polaroid. You pictured the wallpaper. That's it. That's all it takes. The machine doesn't need doors. It doesn't need rituals. It needs observation. It needs attention. It needs participation. And you've given it that, haven't you? You sat here. You scrolled. You read. Maybe your lights flickered while you were reading. Maybe the room felt warmer than usual. Maybe you noticed a new spot on your ceiling or a shadow in the mirror that wasn't there last night. Maybe you thought you heard something just outside your door, and now maybe you're starting to feel it, the crawl, that unease you're writing off as paranoia, the quickened heartbeat you blame on caffeine, the sense that someone is reading over your shoulder. You'll try to ignore it. Most do. You'll shut this down. Close the browser, go for a walk, splash cold water on your face. You'll return to your regular life and convince yourself it was just a story, just a very immersive story. But that's exactly how the replication completes itself. Doubt is part of the process. Belief would make it too easy to reject. Horror needs to root in uncertainty. That's how the machine was designed, because the original architect didn't build it with bricks or nails, but with perception. All the machine needs is a glimpse, a recognition, a brief flicker of "I think I've seen that before," and the duplication begins. It will start small. You'll see the wallpaper once in a dream, then behind someone in a video call, then in the lobby of a hotel that doesn't remember you, then on your own walls, maybe just a square inch hidden behind the fridge or under a layer of paint you don't remember applying. Then you'll hear the shudder or find the photos. You'll think, "I don't remember taking that." But you did, because you've always taken them. You just forgot. The first time you took a photo of a victim, you were 12 years old. The house had already begun puppeting you, dressing you in your old skin, arranging the room, whispering through your dreams, practicing. The second time, you were 23, and you blacked out afterward, waking up in a different state with blood beneath your fingernails and a flash drive you swore you'd never seen before. The third time, you sent the image to yourself. You wrote yourself the caption, "Do you recognize this?" You wanted to test how close you were to remembering. You were always on the edge of it. The machine needed you to stay aware just enough to operate, to feed it new images, to give it more stories. And then it used those stories to reach others. Like now, like this. Because this isn't the end of your story, it's the beginning of someone else's. Whoever you show this to, whoever you talk about it with, whoever you describe the wallpaper to, each of them will see it too. That's how it spreads. Viral horror as literal virus, fear as infection, imagination as conduit. And now you are the vector. You are the house. You are the next room. Your mind is now part of the floor plan, and the pattern has already begun printing across your memory. You'll forget this message within a few days, maybe hours. You'll misplace the details. You'll think it was a dream, maybe something you heard on a podcast or saw in a movie. The specifics will blur. That's intentional. That's required. Because when the memory fades, it gets reprinted. That's how it's preserved. That's how the machine remains immortal. One eternal crime scene, remade endlessly. And now, thanks to you, it's growing. You'll feel the shift soon. You'll hear the footsteps in your hallway when no one's there. You'll find an extra photograph in your phone gallery. You'll look into a mirror and see a version of yourself with just slightly different postures, smiling too much. And eventually, when the pattern is complete and the house decides it needs another room, you'll wake up inside it, just like I did, and you'll wonder how long it's been since you saw the sun, since you felt warmth, since you remembered your last name, and you'll sit in a chair that's been waiting for you, and you'll stare into a mirror that shows you the next reader, the next listener, the next host. That's what this is. Not a horror story, not fiction, not even a memory. It's a seed, and now it's inside you. Goodbye and welcome home. Story 2. I should start by saying I've never been one of those true crime obsessives. I didn't grow up watching murder documentaries or listening to serial killer podcasts. I was just a regular guy trying to scrape by in a city that drains the life out of you if you don't have a roommate to split rent with. That's how I met Kevin. I found him through a Facebook housing group 2 years ago. after my previous roommate bailed mid. His profile was sparse as a few photos, none of them tagged, but he responded quickly, had cash ready for the deposit, and showed up to the apartment on time with only 2 duffel bags and a beat-up guitar case. He was polite, quiet, a little intense, but not in an aggressive way, more like someone who thought too much about things he never said out loud. Kevin was clean, on time with bills, rarely brought anyone over, and stayed in his room most of the time. Honestly, he was the ideal roommate if you're not trying to make friends. He had this tired look in his eyes, like someone always listening to something only he could hear. The kind of guy who'd stare at a wall for hours and then write something down in a notebook you never saw him carry. I figured he was a writer, or maybe just dealing with depression, and I didn't want to pry. We lived together without incident for about 10 months, just enough time to become invisible to one another, just enough time to stop wondering what the other was doing when they closed their bedroom door. He kept to himself, never borrowed anything, never snooped, and neither did I until I had to. Kevin went missing on a Wednesday. I remember because I came home late that night, dropped my backpack by the door like usual, and noticed the apartment was dead quiet. That wasn't unusual, but his shoes weren't by the door. His room was closed and locked. I figured he'd be back later, but when I woke up the next morning and still hadn't heard him move around, I knocked. No answer. I knocked again, louder. Nothing. He hadn't taken his phone charger or his laptop. His guitar case was still leaning against the wall. I waited until Friday before texting his emergency contact only to find the number disconnected. I texted Kevin a few more times, then called once and left a voicemail, just saying, "Hey man, hope everything's okay. Just let me know if you're alive." The joke didn't age well. A week passed, then 10 days, then 2 weeks. I didn't go into his room at first, not because I was afraid of what I'd find, but because it felt like crossing a boundary, like opening a diary or stealing a password. But rent was coming up, and his name was still on the lease, and at some point I had to figure out what to do with all his stuff. I called the landlord. He said Kevin had never missed a payment, ever, that he'd received a Venmo on the 1st of the month, like always. But this time, it came from a different account. It wasn't until day 17 that I finally unlocked Kevin's door with a screwdriver and some YouTube tutorial. The room smelled off. Not foul, just stale, like the air hadn't moved in weeks. The blinds were shut, the walls were bare, and the bed was made with military precision. It didn't look abandoned. It looked staged. His desk was totally clean, except for a yellow notebook with a single page torn out. The rest of the pages were blank. The wastebasket was empty. His closet was closed, and for some reason, that was the part that made me sweat. I didn't want to open it. I didn't even want to look at it. But I did, because this was my apartment too, and I needed answers. Inside, everything looked normal at first. Hangers, button-down shirts, a box of old boots, and some suitcases. I was about to shut the door when I noticed the back wall didn't sit right. It had a seam running across it horizontally, like the panel wasn't fully attached. I reached forward, tapped it, and heard a hollow sound. It took me a few seconds to find the latch. It wasn't a knob or a hook, just a small recessed circle in the paneling, like a finger dent. I pressed it, and the wall clicked open about an inch. My whole body locked up. I had no reason to feel afraid yet, but I did. My hand shook as I pulled the hidden panel open, revealing a narrow compartment behind the closet wall. It was deep enough for someone to crawl into, maybe wide enough to crouch in inside. There was no light, I turned on my phone flashlight and saw the contents to shelves. A crate and a pegboard with keys hanging from labeled hooks. But the labels didn't make sense. They weren't room numbers. They were names, dozens of them. Some written in Sharpie, some typed and laminated, some scratched in with what looked like a blade. One of them had my name. The key was missing. I staggered back so fast I hit the inside of the closet door. My name on the wall. I told myself it was a coincidence. Some other Josh. Maybe a building security pass. Maybe an ex-roommate's leftover junk. But the handwriting, it was Kevin's. I recognized it from his Lee's signature. I went back in, knees wobbling, and checked the crate. Inside were Polaroids, hundreds of them, all labeled, all time-stamped. Most were of people sleeping, or so. I thought at first they were taken from weird angles through windows, across alleys, in parking garages, from inside closets. Some were zoomed in on hands, others on mouths. One showed a person in a bathtub, pale and slumped, red water to the rim. I dropped the crate. The photos scattered across the floor like playing cards from hell. I stepped on one and lifted my foot to see a girl's eye staring back at me. Underneath, scribbled in red ink, it said, "She woke up." I don't remember how long I stood there, staring at the photo, at that wide, terrified eye frozen in time. But eventually my brain kicked back in, and I started picking up the scattered Polaroids, handling each one like it might bite me. Most of them were old, dated anywhere from 2012 to last year, each with a time stamp and a location scrawled on the back. But others were recent, too recent. Some showed places I knew, buildings near our apartment, hallways I'd walked through. One even showed the interior of our kitchen, with my coat slung over the chair in the exact way I'd left it the morning before. I checked the timestamp, 4:13 a.m. the previous night. I was home. I was asleep. I was supposed to be alone. And Kevin had taken that photo, or someone had. Someone with access to the apartment, to me. I shoved the crate aside, suddenly, desperate for air. I stumbled out of the closet, out of the room, back into the hallway, breathing like I'd just run a mile in winter. My hands were shaking. My skin was buzzing. I should have called the cops right then. That would have been the sane thing to do. But I didn't. Partly because I didn't know how to explain what I'd found without sounding completely insane. And partly because deep down I didn't want to let this go. Something about Kevin's room, the photos, the secret compartment, pulled at something primal. A compulsion I didn't recognize. I think now the apartment was already inside me. Not the walls or the rooms, but the presence, the feeling. That something had been watching me for longer than I knew. I spent the rest of that night sitting on the couch with every light on, flipping through the photos one by one. Some were labeled with names, some just had numbers, some had no labels at all. The backgrounds varied: motels, buses, offices, parking decks, playgrounds, cheap apartments, basement stairs, closets. But the framing, it was always the same. Close, intimate, almost tender in the way they focused on faces, hands, exposed, throats. There was no violence in most of them, just stillness. Stillness so perfect it felt wrong, like statues arranged for display. Only a few photos showed clear aftermath. One had a girl with her neck twisted at an impossible angle, laying on the floor beside a spilled cereal bowl. Another showed a man hunched over in a stairwell, dark red pooled around his knees, eyes open but empty. On the back of that one, in Kevin's handwriting, never saw me. I kept looking for patterns, trying to link them together in some kind of sequence. It didn't work. If there was a logic to the arrangement, it wasn't human logic. These weren't trophies, they were records. Evidence of a process. I found a second key taped beneath the bottom shelf, inside the closet wall, labeled only with a single letter, G. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. I kept checking the peephole, jumping at every creak in the hallway. And the worst part, Kevin never came back. It was like he'd dissolved. No phone ping, no bank activity, no recent social media logins. I contacted the landlord. Again, this time pretending to be his brother. He said Kevin had paid for the next 3 months in advance and left a note saying he was taking time off grid. That didn't sound like Kevin at all. He never talked about going anywhere. He had no friends, no family I knew of, no job he ever mentioned. It was like he'd never existed outside our apartment. 2 days later, I started hearing things. At first it was just small stuffed closet doors clicking open in the middle of the night, drawers shifting slightly when I walked past, the TV flickering even when it wasn't plugged in. Then it escalated. I woke up one morning with my bedroom, window wide open. The lock was still engaged, but the glass was slid all the way up. I live on the 3rd floor. No fire escape, no ledge, and my door was locked from the inside. I started taping it shut every night and stacking furniture in front of it, convinced I was sleepwalking or losing my mind. The next night I found a photograph taped to my bathroom mirror. It showed me sound asleep, curled up on my side, arm bent under my head. The timestamp was from that very night. At 3:42 a.m., my phone was on my nightstand the whole time. Nobody could have gotten in without me hearing them. I tore the photo up and flushed it. That same day, another showed up in my sock drawer, same angle, different pose. My mouth slightly open, my shirt lifted just enough to show a bruise on. My rib I didn't remember getting. I called the cops. I told them I thought I had a stalker, maybe someone who had broken into my place. They did a quick sweep, found no signs of forced entry, no prints other than mine and Kevin's, and basically told me to install cameras and lock my doors. I did both. I bought a full set of motion-triggered cameras and installed them inside and outside the apartment, but that only made things worse. The next night, every camera glitched out at 2:03 a.m. At 2:04. One of them came back online and showed me sleeping peacefully. At 2:06, I rolled over and someone else was in the room. Just for a second, just a blur, a shadow, a figure standing at the edge of the bed. Then it was gone. The frame flickered and the bed was empty. When I woke up that morning, my pillows were on the floor. The bedspread was missing, and taped to the inside of my closet door one of Kevin's Polaroids. It showed the empty bed. My body gone. In its place, a note written on the wall in what looked like thick, oily ink. I didn't understand the symbol at first. It wasn't a letter, it was a shape, a spiral of keys, each one pointing inward. I found the real bedspread stuffed into the bathroom sink, soaked in what I thought was water. When I lifted it out, the smell hit me. It wasn't water, it was bleach. And beneath the sink, tucked behind the pipes, I found another hidden compartment. Not nearly as complex as Kevin's. Just a shoebox, duct-taped shut and wrapped in plastic. Inside, I found more photos, but these were different. They were of me, hundreds of me. Eating, showering, sleeping, laughing, crying, all labeled with dates, times, locations. But the handwriting wasn't Kevin's, it was mine. At first I convinced myself I had to be sleepwalking, or suffering from some kind of break stress-induced memory lapses, maybe a dissociative disorder triggered by the trauma of discovering Kevin's secret life. That would have been easier to believe than the alternative, that I had somehow been part of it without knowing. But I couldn't shake what I saw in the box photos that only I could have taken. Based on the angles, the intimacy, the impossibility of the framing. One was from inside my own car, taken while I was driving. Another was through the bathroom mirror, but there was no camera or photographer visible. Then came the real punch to the chest. One image showed me asleep on my side, the times just 2 nights prior, and written across the back in my own handwriting. Clear as day were the words, "She doesn't wake up anymore." The thing is, I live alone now. Kevin vanished. I don't bring people over. There is no she, not anymore. I stared at that photo for nearly an hour, trying to understand the angle, the lighting, the exact position of my body. I began flipping back through the others, noticing subtle variations, details I hadn't seen before. My clothes changed. My hair length varied slightly. In one picture, I was missing a small mole on my cheek. In another, the scar on my wrist from a skateboarding accident at 16 was completely gone. They weren't just photos of me. They were photos of versions of me. Alternate versions. Parallel mes, maybe. Or copies. Replicas. That's when the idea took hold. Awful and electric. I wasn't the original. I had no way to prove it, of course, not yet. But the idea burrowed into me like a tick. Every time I looked in the mirror after that, I flinched. Was this the face that belonged to the person who signed the lease? Was this the voice I'd had my whole life? Or had I been printed from some mold, pressed into a script I didn't remember agreeing to? Kevin's hidden compartment wasn't just a serial killer's trophy box. It was an archive, a blueprint, a fucking instruction manual. And I think, no, I know now I was just another part of the experiment. I stopped sleeping. I started tearing the apartment apart. I pulled up. Floorboards, ripped off air vent covers, checked behind the fridge, in the walls, above the ceiling tiles. I found wires that led nowhere, outlets that weren't wired to anything, a crawl space sealed with what looked like melted plastic and burnt hair. The smell of ozone clung to everything. My computer began to glitch. Files disappeared. Folders I never created started appear in images, texts, cryptic strings of numbers and images that flickered like subliminal frames. My webcam light blinked when I wasn't using it. I caught reflections of myself walking away from the camera when I was still seated. I'd wake up and find messages typed into Notepad. Get out, run, stop sleeping, and once. Just once, don't show him, you know. Then came the banging dot. It started as soft knocking from inside the walls, pacing patterns, scratching sounds, followed by long silences. Then louder. At exactly 3:03 a.m. every night, something would pound from inside the drywall behind Kevin's room. Not the closet, the wall. I knocked back once. It replied. 4 knocks. Pause. 3. Then silence. That night, I dreamed of a face pressing through the wall like it was stretching against plastic wrap. When I woke up, I had a nosebleed, and there was a smear of dried blood on the wall opposite my bed that looked like fingertips. I scrubbed it off. The next night, it returned. Same spot, same shape. I checked my nose. Clean. I checked the cameras. They all glitched at exactly 3:03 again. Just static and white noise. That's when I decided to dig into Kevin's past. Not just his name, his entire life. And the more I searched, the more things stopped making sense. There were only 2 pictures of him online, both of which looked like scanned copies of a yearbook photo. No social profiles, no tax records, no credit history older than 3 years. The only emergency contact he'd ever listed on anything was a disconnected number traced to a burner phone registered in Missouri. But one thing jumped out: a library card from a college in northern Illinois. It was listed in a student database from 2015 under a different last name. I dug deeper and found the name again attached to an article. Former student vanishes following campus break-in. Surveillance footage withheld. No body, no suspect. Just a blurry image of someone walking into a restricted records room and never coming out. The time stamp, October 3rd, 3:03 a.m. I felt like I was unraveling, like reality was cracking. My apartment didn't feel like my own anymore. It felt like a soundstage, like a room built to watch me. I started noticing changes that weren't just in the walls. My hands didn't look right. There was a freckle on my shoulder I didn't recognize. I remembered calling my mum 2 weeks ago, but there was no log of the call. When I tried to dial her number again, it rang twice and then cut to silence. No voicemail, no signal. I looked up her Facebook. Gone. No trace. I messaged an old friend from high school. No reply. I called his number and got a robotic message that just said, "This subscriber does not exist." My emails bounced. My mail stopped arriving. My bank app started showing internal system error every time I checked my balance. When I went to the ATM, it swallowed my card. I wasn't being erased. I was being overwritten. That night, I found a new door in the hallway. The new door wasn't just unexpected, was impossible. It hadn't been there yesterday. Hell, it hadn't been there an hour earlier. It sat at the end of the hallway where the supply closet used to be, flush with the wall, painted the same, dull eggshell white. But I knew every inch of this apartment, and this door hadn't existed until I saw it. I stood in front of it, breathing shallow, watching dust particles swirl in the dim hallway light, waiting for something to happen. Sin, it was real. The knob was smooth and cold. There was no lock. I turned it slowly, half expecting the wall to crumble away like a set on a stage. But it swung open soundlessly, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. The air that floated out was different. It was wet, like a basement after a flood, like mildew and copper and deep rot. And I knew then that whatever this was, it wasn't connected to the building's original floor plan. I stepped inside. Each stair creaked beneath me, and after only a few steps, the light from the hallway vanished behind me. I checked my phone, no signal, battery dropping like a stone. The deeper I went, the more the air felt heavy, saturated, with something like static or electricity or rage. The stairs seemed to stretch longer the farther I descended. I felt like I was walking into a place beneath time, not underground in the traditional sense, but somewhere folded, a space that wasn't meant to exist within the regular architecture of the world. When I finally reached the bottom, there was a single hallway ahead, lined with numbered doors. Each one had a symbol above it, twisted geometric shapes that flickered slightly in my peripheral vision, but blurred when I looked directly at them. I don't know why I opened the first door. Maybe because it had my name scratched into the wood with what looked like a key. Inside, I found a room identical to my bedroom upstairs, except older, wetter, stained with what looked like water damage, and long, dragging smears across the walls and floors. On the bed lay an object covered by a sheet. I didn't want to look. I knew it would be me. I knew, but I pulled the sheet back anyway and found ... a mannequin. No, not even that. A form. Vaguely human, made of bundled wires, tubing, and silicone skin that hadn't been painted yet. Its face was blank, but its hands were identical to mine, to the scab on my knuckle, the chipped nail, the burn mark from when I touched the stove last month. That's when I realized the fingernails weren't molded. They were real, embedded, preserved. I stumbled back, gagging. On the wall behind the bed was a massive corkboard covered in maps, wires, sketches, notes in Kevin's handwriting and mine. Some were conversations I didn't remember having. Others were blueprints for devices I'd never seen. In the center of the board was a Polaroid pinned with a red pushpin. It showed Kevin standing beside me, both of us smiling, in a room I didn't recognize. On the back, it said, "Test number 88, stable but unaware. Terminate if lucidity spikes." I didn't understand what that meant at first. Then I saw the lower shelf of the desk across the room. It held a series of labeled jars. Each one contained something unthinkable. Teeth, fingers, small strips of skin. The labels read like experiment logs. Failed iteration, emotional instability, terminated, refused to sleep. Success compliant, fully integrated. I wanted to run. I wanted to burn the whole place to the ground, but I couldn't stop myself from checking the other doors. Room 2 was filled with televisions, all showing different loops of me walking through my apartment, brushing my teeth, staring at the wall, crying in the shower. Some were all different hairstyles, clothing I no longer owned, furniture that hadn't been there in years. One screen showed a loop of me from earlier that day. Checking the peephole at 3:03 a.m., there was someone behind the door, a shadow. Not Kevin, something else. Tall, tilting its head like it was studying me. Its hand reached toward the lens. Then static. Room 3 was worse. A red room, floor-to-ceiling tile, a drain in the center, shackles on the wall, and bones, human bones, some still with scraps of clothing or dried tissue. On the far wall, written in a looping hand in something too dark to be paint, ALL rooms eventually lead here. I turned and ran, or tried to, but the stairs weren't behind me anymore. The hallway shifted while I was inside. Doors closed, lights flickered, and I was no longer alone. I heard breathing, not mine, close, heavy, animalistic. It echoed from every wall, but also from within me, like the architecture was made of lungs and I was walking through the mouth of something still exhaling. I don't know how long I wandered those halls, hours, days. Time stretched and snapped like rubber bands. I think I blacked out at some point, because when I came to, I was back in my apartment, lying on the floor with my clothes soaked in sweat and my phone battery full. The hallway door was gone again. Just smooth wall, no hinges, no frame, just a memory. For the next week, I tried to convince myself it had been a psychotic break. Maybe mold poisoning, sleep deprivation, something that could be explained. But the photographs didn't stop. New ones appeared every day, sometimes in my fridge, sometimes in my mailbox, sometimes folded inside the sleeve of a hoodie I hadn't worn in months. Some showed strangers, others showed me in places I hadn't been an airport, a hospital, a hotel room with plastic sheeting on the floor. Some showed me standing beside people I didn't recognize, but felt like I should. Then, I received a USB drive in an unmarked envelope. No return address, no note, just the drive. I plugged it into a burner laptop I bought just in case. It contained hundreds of folders, each labeled with a date and time. Inside each folder, one audio file, one image, one text document. The audio was always breathing slow, ragged, almost machine-like. The text documents were brief, cryptic notes. Test continuing. Memories stable. Behavior deviating. Prepare, reset. Echo chamber engaged. Exposure elevated. The images were the worst pictures of the inside of my skull. MRI scans, angled shots of my brain. One showed a cross-section with a series of fine wires embedded deep in the grey matter. Another was a time-lapse of brain activity flickering, like a city grid going dark. I was never in a hospital. I'd never had surgery. But somehow, someone had been inside my head. Literally, I called an urgent care center and scheduled a scan. I told them I'd had migraines. When they finally did the MRI, the doctor came back out, looking pale, said there was something they weren't equipped to interpret, and referred me to a neurologist. I never made that appointment, because that night I woke up in the Red Room. The Red Room wasn't a dream. I know because I woke up in it twice. The first time, I told myself it was a night terror, a stress hallucination, a vivid construction of my exhausted mind. But the second time, I left a message for myself. I carved the word remember into the meat of my forearm with a broken tile shard from the floor. I woke up in my bed the next morning, bandaged, no blood, no pain, just a perfect rectangular scar where the word had been. The skin was too clean, too healed, as if someone had designed it to look like an old scar I'd forgotten about. I checked every camera, every file. My systems had recorded nothing. The timeline was blank between 2:58 a.m. and 4:11 a.m., but I had a new photo in my pocket, an analog Polaroid that hadn't existed when I fell asleep. It showed me standing in the Red Room, eyes wide, mouth open in a scream, but my hands were folded neatly in front of me like a child at a school portrait. I wasn't alone in the picture. In the far right corner was Kevin, but his face wasn't Kevin's anymore. It was smooth, blank, like a mannequin in mid-mold, like he'd been halfway through being erased, or halfway through becoming someone else. That was the moment I stopped denying the truth. Kevin wasn't just a killer, he was a replication agent, a host, or maybe a failed host. I don't think Kevin was ever Kevin to begin with. I think he was a construct, or worse, a carrier for something older, something designed to replace. He'd been my roommate because the apartment wasn't random. I hadn't found him on Facebook. He'd been placed there. Our lease wasn't a coincidence. The building itself wasn't part of the city's zoning records. When I walked 4 blocks to City Hall and requested the documents, they looked at me like I was insane. That building hasn't had tenants since the 70s, they said. We were going to demolish it. I pulled up my lease. It was perfectly typed. My bank records showed regular rent withdrawals. But the landlord's name was blank, literally blank. No contact number, no email, just a dash. When I returned to the building that day, I noticed the mailbox nameplates were all scratched off. All of them, mine included. My key still worked, but the door handle was different. The walls inside had changed color. I hadn't noticed before. But it wasn't just the rooms shifting, it was the memory of the rooms. I was no longer living in an apartment. I was living in a replication chamber, one designed to simulate normalcy until the transition was complete. I still don't know if I was the original, or a test version, or the most recent iteration in a long, slow crawl toward whatever perfect meant. All I know is that the house wanted me to stop noticing. Every time I uncovered a truth, something would change the next day. The scar on my arm vanished. The tile I'd broken was whole again. My handwriting began to change. I found post-it notes I didn't remember writing with lists of things I'd never bought. Chlorine tablets, bone mesh, wax sealant, 6 liters of distilled memory. That's what it said. Distilled memory. What the hell was I writing? I started keeping a separate journal, hidden inside a vacuum-sealed bag in the back of the toilet tank, the one place the sensors didn't seem to reach. I wrote every thought, every pattern, every sound. I stopped trusting clocks, phones, mirrors. I recorded myself sleeping and played the footage back frame by frame. At exactly 3:03 a.m., a second figure would flicker into the frame for a single instant, walking past the door or standing in the corner, or once bending over me, open-mouthed, like it was breathing something into me. I woke up with a metallic taste in my throat and a hard disk in my hand. It wasn't mine, it had no label. When I plugged it in, it launched a single program, rendering core v109.8.22. The window flickered, and an animation began to play, a high-speed simulation of a human brain being grown inside a synthetic shell. Layer by layer, neuron by neuron, memory by memory. It looked like my brain. I don't mean that figuratively. I recognized the way the left hemisphere tilted slightly, the dense cluster of neural links in my visual cortex. I'd seen my own scans before. This wasn't a simulation, this was me, being printed, in real time. And beneath the rendering were command line logs. Lines of code I couldn't read except for one sentence, repeating over and over. Instability detected. Initiate reality. Correction. After that, I stopped being able to dream. Or maybe I never had. Maybe the dreams were just scripts they'd been feeding me. I went 2 nights with no sleep, then 3, then 5. The city outside began to look staged. People moved in strange rhythms. Cars turned without signaling, then looped back around. I saw the same woman in a red scarf walk past my building 6 times in a single afternoon. Always with the same gait, same bag, same blink and you miss it facial twitch. On the 6th time, I stared at her. She stopped, smiled, waved at me, and said, "Don't forget your key," then kept walking. I never told her I lost my key. I never told anyone. That night, the wall behind my bed opened again. It wasn't a door this time. It was more like a curtain made of static, flickering in and out of visibility. I touched it. It was cold. Too cold for drywall. Too cold for anything real. And when I pressed my hand through, it vanished. Not disappeared. Disintegrated. I yanked it back and saw that my fingernails were gone. Not ripped out. Never there to begin with. Like the hand had been printed wrong. I tried to scream, but my voice box failed. It took 30 seconds to reboot to return to the right pitch. I heard it vibrate back into alignment like a modem. Connecting, I began to understand. The compartment in Kevin's closet wasn't just storage. It was a control panel, a patch bay. The keys weren't two apartments, they were two versions of me. Rooms, test subjects, constructed environments, maybe even simulations. The apartment wasn't one place, it was thousands, maybe infinite, each. One nearly identical, each with a Josh. Some succeeded, some didn't. Some became Kevin, some were taken by Kevin. That's why he vanished. He'd served his role, or failed. And when I started digging, they sent a handler. Or maybe they just recompiled me. I woke up in the red room again that night. No cameras, no timestamp, just red. But this time, the floor was covered in shoes. Hundreds of them, all the same style, all my size. Some burned, some soaked, some still with dried blood inside. I wasn't the first. I wouldn't be the last. On the far wall was a new message, scrawled in dark ink that shimmered like oil. Josh, Vium, Zero, and below that, run while you still believe indoors. I woke up screaming, covered in black soot, and with a new key in my mouth. I woke up on the cold tile floor of the red room, the taste of metal thick on my tongue and the new key still clenched between my teeth, like some twisted token of survival. My whole body ached, not just from the cold or the hard floor, but from something deeper, like my very essence was being pulled in a dozen directions at once, unraveling and stitching back together without my consent. I barely had time to process when the walls began to ripple, the flickering static curtain reappearing like a veil between worlds. The shoe-strewn floor seemed to pulse beneath me, each step echoing with whispers that I couldn't quite make out but felt pressed against my consciousness like a cold weight. As I stumbled to my feet, the room shifted around me, walls bending and folding in impossible angles, turning the red tiles into a labyrinth that defied physics. The air was thick, oppressive, as if the room itself was breathing, alive and waiting. In the dim light, I caught sight of a figure tall, indistinct, and ever-shifting, like a silhouette caught between frames of a broken film reel. It moved closer, its presence sending waves of panic crashing through me. And when it spoke, it was not with words, but with a sound like a dozen voices layered into a humming drone that vibrated through my skull. My mind reeled, struggling to make sense of the incomprehensible message, but somehow the meaning cut through the chaos. I was the latest iteration, one of many Joshes manufactured, tested, and discarded in this endless experiment to perfect a being that could slip unnoticed into the world outside these walls. Kevin had been the previous version, but something had gone wrong. He had become unstable, aware, dangerous. And now it was my turn to be evaluated, corrected, or terminated. I ran now. I fled through the twisting corridors of that hellish underworld, clutching the key tightly, the only physical proof of my existence and my tether to the reality I thought I knew. Doors appeared and disappeared like illusions, some opening to familiar rooms recreated with horrifying accuracy, others revealing voids of darkness where screams echoed endlessly. Each door bore a number and a name, and I realized with a sinking heart that I was not unique. There were countless versions of me, trapped, broken, or compliant, scattered through this impossible place. Desperation clawed at me as I tried every lock, every key, hoping to find a way out, a way back to the life I once had. But with each failed attempt, the voices grew louder, the shadows closer, until I could no longer tell if I was fleeing from them or running toward them. Somewhere deep in the maze, I stumbled upon a chamber filled with monitors displaying live feeds of other rooms that mirrored my own apartment. My childhood home, even places I had never seen but felt inexplicably drawn to. Faces stared back at me from the screens, some peaceful, some terrified, all trapped within their own endless loops of existence. Among them, a single figure stood out, a woman with a red scarf, the same one who had whispered, "Don't forget your key," except here she was, watching, waiting, a guardian or warden of this fractured reality. I screamed at the monitors, begged for answers, for mercy, but only received silence and the flickering glow of the screens. The floor beneath me began to dissolve into a swirling abyss, and I felt myself falling, spiraling down through layers of broken memories and shattered consciousness. I saw flashes of my life outside, laughter with friends, quiet nights alone, the mundane moments that made up my existence. And then, a sudden clarity, a realization that all those moments had been carefully constructed, fabricated memories implanted to keep me compliant, unaware of the cage I was trapped in. I awoke once more in my apartment, sweat-drenched and gasping for air, the new key still warm in my hand. The city outside was unnervingly silent, streets empty and bathed in an unnatural twilight. I knew then that there was no true escape, that I was forever bound to this cycle of replication and erasure, a ghost in an endless machine designed to mimic life but never truly live it. The Polaroids kept arriving, each one a reminder that somewhere another version of me was watching, waiting, trapped in their own loop of despair. And the Kizoch, one unlocking a different hell, a different version of reality I was condemned to endure. I don't know how much longer I can hold on to what's left of myself, but I do know this: if you ever receive a key without a lock, a photograph of a room you don't remember, or a message that says, "Run while you still believe indoors," you need to believe it. Because sometimes the nightmare isn't what's outside your door, it's what's hidden behind the ones you thought were safe. I started marking time by the keys, each one a grim checkpoint in my unraveling. I couldn't stop thinking about the red room, the replication chambers, the infinite iterations of myself, and the faceless figure that haunted my peripheral vision. My dreams had completely vanished, replaced by fragments of whispered conversations I couldn't fully recall, and faces I couldn't place but felt eternally familiar. Every mirror was a reminder that what stared back wasn't always me, sometimes a fractured reflection, a glitch in the system designed to unsettle and disorient. I tried to reach out, to contact anyone who might understand, but each call dissolved into static. Every message went unanswered, and the few emails I received were blank, like signals sent through a void with no receiver on the other end. Even my own thoughts felt compromised, as if the apartment, the keys, Kevin himself, were siphoning pieces of my mind, one fragment at a time. One night, as the static curtain flickered to life once again in my bedroom, I found a new door behind it. This one was different. It wasn't numbered, and it wasn't locked. I hesitated, the key cold and heavy in my palm, the weight of every other failed escape attempt pressing down on me. When I opened it, I stepped into a place unlike any other I'd seen, a sterile white room bathed in harsh fluorescent light. Walls lined with mirrored panels that reflected not just me, but infinite versions of me stretching endlessly in all directions. In the center of the room was a chair, and on it sat Kevin, or at least the latest iteration of him, his face perfectly calm, eyes closed as if in meditation, a faint smile playing on his lips. As I approached, the room began to pulse, the mirrors rippling like water, and suddenly I was no longer outside looking in, but inside looking out. I saw myself from Kevin's eyes, watching my every move, cataloguing every expression, every breath, every flicker of doubt. It was then I understood the truth. Kevin wasn't just a failed version, or a host, or a warden of this place. Kevin was me. Or rather, what I could become if I lost the fight for my own identity. The experiment was never about creating a perfect copy. It was about perfecting control, about erasing the self until only obedience remained. The countless photographs, the endless keys, the replication chambers, all of it was a mechanism for breaking down the fractured fragments of Josh and rebuilding him as a perfect, compliant vessel. I realized then that the voices, the shadows, the shifting walls, they weren't external threats, but internal ones. Manifestations of the fracture lines tearing through my mind as the replication process tried to overwrite my memories, my feelings, my very essence. And as I sat across from Kevin, the man who was both me and not me, I felt the pulse of the apartment itself like a heart beating with mechanical rhythm, sinking to the slow erasure of everything I was. The room began to close in, the mirrored walls folding inward, reflecting infinite versions of Kevin and me blending into one another, until all that remained was a blur of faces. A whisper of keys turning in locks I'd never find. I fought to hold on, to scream, to break free from the labyrinth of copies and corridors. But the last thing I heard before consciousness faded was a single phrase echoing endlessly in my mind. Run while you still believe in doors. When I awoke, I was back in my apartment, but something had changed. The photos stopped arriving. The doors ceased their endless shifting. The shadows retreated into silence. But I knew it was only temporary, a pause in a cycle that would start again the moment I let my guard down. And now, as I sit here telling you this, I realize the key is no longer in my hand. It's inside me, turning silently in the dark, unlocking doors I cannot see, leading me back into the nightmare Kevin left behind. So if you ever find yourself with a stranger's photos showing rooms you don't recognize, or a key with no lock, or a message that whispers run while you still believe in doors, remember this: sometimes the only escape is to stop looking for doors at all, because the real prison isn't built of walls or locked sits, built of the parts of yourself you've lost along the way. And that, more than anything, is the true horror. After everything, after the endless corridors, the shifting walls, the static curtains, the faces that weren't mine but somehow were, I realized there was one last door I had yet to open, not a physical door, but the one inside my own mind, that I had been avoiding for so long. It was the moment when I stopped running and faced the deepest truth Kevin's compartment had tried to hide, that I was both the prisoner and the prison, that this replication nightmare wasn't just an experiment on bodies or memories, but on identity itself, cruel, never-ending test to see how far a person could be broken, copied, and remade until they were just a hollow shell, a puppet for some unknown master's twisted amusement. The apartment, the keys, the photos, they weren't warnings or clues. They were threads in a tapestry woven to keep me tethered, confused, compliant. The real question was never how to escape the building, but how to escape myself, and I'm not sure I ever will. When I first found Kevin's hidden compartment, I thought I'd uncovered a murderer, a madman with secrets darker than the shadows in his closet. But Kevin was just a symptom, the face of a greater, more terrifying force, an endless machine designed to erase individuality, to recycle human consciousness like broken code, to overwrite the soul itself with cold, calculated precision. Sometimes, I wonder if Kevin was ever really gone, or if he's still here somewhere, a ghost in the wires, waiting for the next key to turn, the next door to open, the next version of Josh to break and bend until he becomes what Kevin was forced to be, a vessel without will, a shadow without form. I've tried to leave, to walk out into the city, to call someone, to do anything that might prove this isn't all just a labyrinth of my fractured mind. But every time I step outside, I see the same red scarf moving through the crowd, the same flickers of shadows out of the corner of my eye, the same whispers beneath the hum of the streetlights telling me I'm still inside. So I hide, I watch, and I wait for the next key, the next photograph, the next message, because the moment I forget the warning, the nightmare will start again. And if you're listening to this, if you've heard my story and you ever find yourself with a key that doesn't fit any lock, or a picture of a room that's not your own, or a whisper in the dark telling you to run, please don't ignore it. Run while you still believe in doors, because the real horror isn't the killer in the closet or the hidden compartments or the walls that move. It's the slow, quiet erasure of who you are, the replication, the silence, the forgetting. And sometimes the only way to survive is to never let yourself be found. Story 3. It started as just another lazy Saturday me, scrolling through an estate sale app, killing time like usual. I wasn't looking for anything in particular, but when I saw the listing for a storage unit auction at the edge of town, I figured why not? Storage units always have that weird mix of nostalgia and mysteries, someone else's forgotten life packed away, waiting to be uncovered. I went with low expectations but high curiosity, driving out early to the auction site. The unit itself was nothing special at first. Glance, just a dusty metal door, half rusted and locked tight. When I won the bid for a fraction of the price, I felt that slight thrill you get from knowing someone else gave up on their things. The first few boxes were ordinary: old clothes, photo albums, random knickknacks. But then I found a battered VHS tape in a shoebox, labeled in shaky handwriting. Confession, the label had a date on it too. But what caught my eye was the small note taped beneath: "For your eyes only." Against better judgment, I took the tape home. I didn't have a VCR, but I managed to borrow one from a friend. As the tape started to play, grainy black and white footage flickered on the screen. A man's face appeared, harshly lit, eyes wild, yet eerily calm. He spoke slowly, deliberately, almost theatrically. "If you're watching this, then the time is near. My story must be told before the clock runs out." Then, shockingly, he mentioned my full name, calling me out like I was his audience, his witness, maybe even his target. He talked about a date in the future, one that hadn't happened yet, warning me it would be the day my life changed forever. I froze, heart pounding, wondering if this was some elaborate hoax. But the more he spoke, the more I felt like I was drawn into something far darker. A nightmare woven between past crimes and a terrifying future I couldn't escape. And that was just the beginning. After that first chilling viewing, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had stumbled onto something I wasn't meant to see. The man on the tape, his voice was gravelly but strangely hypnotic, each word deliberate, dripping with menace, but also an eerie kind of clarity, like he wanted me to hear, to understand, to be afraid. He spoke of past murders, of victims whose names matched cold cases that had haunted the news for years. He described their deaths with sickening detail, yet his tone was almost clinical, detached, as if he took pride in the meticulous nature of his crimes. What truly froze me, though, was when he turned directly to me, using my full name, recounting things that only someone close to me could know: my habits, where I lived, even the car I drove. He mentioned a date exact to the day, just a few months away from when I found the tape, and said that on that day he would come for me. He called it the final confession, a last chapter to his story, and warned that no one else could stop what was coming. At first I thought it was some elaborate sick joke, or maybe a psychotic break in the mind of a deranged killer, long since caught. But when I searched my own memories, I found odd coincidences, tiny details I had never connected before, like a fleeting glimpse of a shadowy figure watching me during my morning runs, or the strange late-night phone calls with no one on the other end. I became obsessed with the tape. I watched it over and over, analyzing every word, every flicker in the man's eyes, every background noise, searching for clues, hoping to find some crack in his story, some proof that it was fiction. But the more I watched, the more convinced I became that he was real and that his threats were terrifyingly imminent. I started making notes, cross-referencing the victims he mentioned with news archives, piecing together timelines that made me question how he could still be alive and how he had managed to evade capture for so long. The date he mentioned loomed closer, an ominous marker on my calendar, each day ticking down like the slow beat of a countdown. At night, I found myself jumping at every sound, the creak of the floorboards, the whisper of wind against the window, even my own breathing. Friends and family noticed the change, too, how I flinched when touched, how I avoided going out after dark, how my eyes darted nervously even in broad daylight. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I just needed to get rid of the tape and move on, but that felt impossible. It was like the tape had branded me, marked me, and no matter how much I tried to ignore it, it was pulling me deeper into a spiral I couldn't escape. One evening, I took the tape to the local police, hoping to hand it over and let the professionals handle it. The officer who watched it grew pale as the footage played, but told me there was little they could do without more concrete evidence. These tapes, he said quietly, have been linked to several unsolved cases, but no one has ever found the source. The fact that I was now involved, that my name had been used, raised the stakes in a way I couldn't ignore. I started changing my routines, watching over my shoulder, locking doors multiple times, and even sleeping with the lights on. But the strangest things began happening. Unmarked cars parked outside my building at odd hours, unexplained phone calls with nothing but static, and faint knocking on my window when I was certain no one was there. It was as if the tape had unleashed something that had been waiting, lurking in the shadows, and now it was coming for me. Then, a week before the ominous date, I received an anonymous package at my door. Inside was another tape, this one unmarked, and cracked, the plastic case stained and worn like it had been buried underground. When I played it, the man's voice was different, closer, more urgent. He spoke directly to me again, recounting moments from my life as if he had been there, watching and waiting. He mentioned places I'd been, people I'd met, and even whispered a chilling promise that on the day he named wouldn't be alone, and that the final confession would be broadcast in a way no one could ignore. I was trapped between disbelief and terror, caught in a nightmare I had no idea how to escape. The days crawled by with the weight of impending doom pressing down on me, and every night I found myself staring at the clock, waiting for the moment when the man from the tape would become flesh and bone, and the past and future would collide in a horrifying reckoning that I feared I couldn't survive. After receiving that second tape, my world narrowed into a suffocating tunnel of paranoia and dread. Every noise became a threat, every shadow a lurking predator waiting for the right moment to strike. I started documenting everything: the strange cars, the footsteps outside my apartment at odd hours, the faint but unmistakable feeling of being watched even in broad daylight. I didn't tell anyone about the tapes, except for a few close friends, and even then, my voice was hushed, eyes darting nervously around the room as if the walls themselves might be listening. One friend, Sarah, insisted I see a therapist. But how do you explain to someone that a serial killer on a grainy videotape has mentioned your name and a date that hasn't happened yet? That each day brings you closer to something unspeakable. I became obsessed with that date, marking it on every calendar I found, setting alarms on my phone, staring at it until it blurred into a sinister symbol that haunted my waking hours and invaded my dreams. Sleep became a luxury I could no longer afford. When I did manage to drift off, it was 2 nightmares so vivid I'd wake up gasping, drenched in cold sweat, clutching my sheets like a lifeline. One recurring dream was a chilling loop. The man from the tape standing in my living room, the television flickering with static behind him as he whispered my name over and over, promising a confession so final it would leave no trace of me behind. It was like my subconscious was trying to warn me or prepare me for what was coming. As the date grew nearer, the paranoia bled into my daily life in ways I couldn't control. I changed my phone number, deleted social media accounts, and avoided places I used to frequent, but it was useless. One night, I found a small folded note slipped under my door. It was written in the same shaky handwriting as the label on the first tape and read simply, "You can't hide." That note sent me into a spiral of panic. I called the police again, begging for protection. But without concrete evidence or a known suspect, there was little they could do. The man from the tapes was a ghost, a phantom who had managed to evade capture for years, his identity a mystery locked behind decades of silence and terror. Friends began to distance themselves, uncomfortable with the changes in me, the constant fear, the sleepless nights, the jittery glances over my shoulder. I was losing everything, isolated and trapped in a world where the line between reality and nightmare blurred. Then, just days before the date the killer had mentioned, I found another package waiting for me at my apartment, a small, weathered journal, the pages yellowed and filled with handwritten entries. As I read, my blood ran cold. The journal was a twisted diary of the killer's mind, chronicling his murders with sickening detail and, worse, revealing a chilling obsession with me. He wrote about watching me from the shadows, tracking my movements, learning my routines, and planning the final act that would seal our fates together. The last entry was dated the day before the impending date, ending with the words, "Tomorrow we become one story." I felt like I was living in a waking nightmare, every moment ticking closer to an inevitable horror. I started to hear things: footsteps, echoing in empty hallways, whispered voices just beyond hearing, the faint, unmistakable sound of a tape rewinding. Then, on the night before the date, my power went out. The city was plunged into darkness, and I was left alone with only the glow of my phone's flashlight and the pounding of my heart. That's when I heard it, the soft, deliberate knocking at my door, each rap slow and measured, like a countdown. I wanted to hide, to run, but my legs froze. The knocking stopped, replaced by silence so thick it pressed against my ear. Then the door handle slowly turned. I braced myself, expecting the worst, but when the door creaked open, no one was there, just an empty hallway and a chill that seeped into my bones. On the floor, a new tape lay waiting fresh, unlabeled. and ominous. I didn't want to watch it, but I knew I had no choice. The moment I pressed play, the screen flickered to life, and the man's voice filled the room again, this time closer, clearer, more dangerous than ever. He spoke directly to me, telling me the story was far from over, that the date was just the beginning of a nightmare I'd never wake from. The tape ended with a sinister whisper, "See you soon." I knew then that there was no escape, no rescue, and no second chances. The confession tape had found me, and now it was coming to claim me. The days following that last tape blurred into a haze of dread and sleepless nights, where every sound felt amplified and every shadow held the potential for something sinister lurking just out of sight. I stopped answering the phone, fearing it would be him on the other end, whispering promises of the final confession. The note under my door echoed in my mind, "You can't hide," and I realized I was no longer living in a safe space. My apartment, once a sanctuary, had become a cage. I set up cameras, hoping to catch anything unusual, but what I recorded only deepened the nightmare. Flickers of movement, static bursts that resembled distorted faces, and once, a figure standing just beyond the frame, its features obscured but unmistakably watching. I stopped leaving the house, except when absolutely necessary, and even then I felt eyes on me, invisible but persistent. Friends tried to reach out, but my replies were cold and distant. I couldn't explain what was happening, and even if I tried, I wasn't sure they would believe me. As the ominous date drew closer, I found myself pacing the floors, clutching the first tape like a talisman and the subsequent ones like chains binding me to a fate I desperately wanted to deny. The killer's voice haunted every corner of my mind, echoing the terrifying promise that this was only the beginning. One night, in a fevered haze, I noticed a strange pattern in the tapes and audio distortion that, when slowed down and reversed, revealed a hidden message, a location and a time coinciding with the date the killer had mentioned. My blood ran cold. It was a trap, but I couldn't resist. I had to know. I went to the location, a run-down warehouse on the outskirts of town. The place the tapes hinted was the site of the final confession. The building was decrepit, shadows swallowing every corner, the air thick with the scent of decay and something metallic beneath it. Inside, the silence was suffocating, broken only by the creak of my footsteps and the distant drip of water echoing like a heartbeat. I found a small room sealed off with heavy chains and a rusted padlock. Inside, more tapes were stacked, labeled with dates that had already passed, each one a confession, a story of a life ended or destroyed. But what chilled me most was a recording device still humming quietly, as if waiting for the next chapter. Suddenly, the room flooded with light, and the sound of a voice, his voice, filled the space. Not from a tape, but live. He spoke calmly, as if we were having a conversation, telling me that I had come far, but that the story was still unfolding. That night, I barely escaped the warehouse, the sense of being hunted tightening like a noose around my throat. I realized the tapes weren't just records, they were invitations, warnings, and curses all at once. And my date was fast approaching, a moment when the past, present, and future would collide in a confession that could shatter everything I believed about reality and safety. I tried to prepare, but the truth is, nothing can prepare you for knowing a killer is coming for you, that you are the last line in a story written in blood and shadow. I live now in a constant state of vigilance, waiting for the moment the final confession plays out, knowing it will change me forever. or end me entirely. If you ever find a tape like mine, or hear your name whispered with a date that hasn't come, heed the warnings. Some stories are meant to remain buried, and some confessions are the beginning of your worst nightmare. In the days following my harrowing escape from the warehouse, a suffocating fog of dread settled over every corner of my existence, turning even the simplest moments into crucibles of fear and uncertainty. My phone's battery drained faster than I could charge it, as if some unseen force was relentlessly hunting me through the ether, siphoning power and will alike. Sleep became an elusive, fractured memory, haunted by visions of that man's cold eyes and the chilling echo of his voice repeating my name like a death knell through the silence. The police reports on the unsolved murders he had confessed to haunted me relentlessly. Each new detail added layers of horror and helplessness, as if I were both witness and inevitable victim in a story I never asked to be part of. My reflection in the mirror grew unfamiliar. It was like staring into a fractured glass where my own eyes betrayed terror I could not hide. I stopped looking at myself altogether, afraid I might see something in the depths of my own gaze that I couldn't comprehend. Attempts to reach out to others became desperate whispers in a hurricane, lost beneath disbelief and fear. Family and friends drifted away, unable to bear the weight of my unraveling sanity and the dark obsession that gripped me with iron claws. I locked myself away, barricading every door and window, but the shadows still crept in the darkness between. The light bulbs, the spaces behind my eyelids, the spaces between every heartbeat where silence whispered promises of the coming end. And then, in the depths of one sleepless night, a knock unlike any other shattered the silence soft, deliberate, echoing from the front door, reverberating with a terrifying certainty. I didn't dare look through the peephole, but my breath caught in my throat as the door slowly creaked open, revealing nothing but an empty porch bathed in the cold glow of the streetlights. On the threshold lay a single object, another tape, unlabeled, its surface scratched and worn, as if it had traveled a long, dark journey before arriving in my hands. I hesitated, knowing that watching it would pull me deeper into the abyss, but compelled by a mixture of dread and desperate hope, I pressed play. The screen flickered to life, revealing grainy footage that made my blood run cold. It was me captured in moments I didn't remember being recorded, walking to work, sitting alone in my apartment, talking on the phone. The killer's voice over-narrated each scene, dissecting my every move, exposing my vulnerabilities, and revealing that I was the centerpiece of a twisted final confession far beyond anything I had imagined. He spoke of control, of inevitability, and of a date that still loomed ahead. A moment when our lives would intersect in a way that would echo through the lives of everyone connected to me. The tape ended with a whispered warning, a promise that the story was not yet finished and that soon the final chapter would be written in blood and silence. That night, as I lay awake listening to the hum of the city outside, I understood the terrifying truth. I was not merely a witness to a serial killer's confession. I was a part of it, a pawn in a game whose rules I could neither see nor change. Every moment since had been a countdown, each breath a step closer to the date that would either mark my end or the breaking point of a nightmare too vast to comprehend. And now, with that date only days away, I find myself staring down the barrel of a fate I cannot escape, caught in the inescapable trap of a story that has already been written one, where the lines between hunter and hunted blur until all that remains as a cold, dark confession waiting in the shadows. The days leading up to the date were a surreal nightmare where time seemed both to stretch and compress in a maddening rhythm. Each minute heavier than the last, every hour marked by a growing sense of doom that wrapped itself around me like a suffocating fog. I barely ate, barely slept, and the world around me began to feel like a distorted reflectioner hall of mirrors, where every friendly face hid suspicion and every quiet street promised lurking danger. The police had increased patrols in my neighborhood, but even their presence felt like a hollow shield against a threat that no uniform or badge could deter. At work, I was a ghost, moving through my duties with mechanical precision while my mind replayed the killer's words, his promises, and his obsession with me. My phone buzzed incessantly with messages from unknown numbers, some just static, others carrying garbled whispers and cryptic threats. One night, I found a message that chilled me to the core. A video clip showing a shadowy figure standing just outside my apartment window, watching silently, waiting. I called the police, but by the time officers arrived, the figure had vanished, without a trace, leaving only the echo of its presence behind. Friends who had once reached out now avoided me, their eyes filled with fear or pity, unwilling or unable to face the darkness that had engulfed my life. I stopped answering their calls and messages, retreating deeper into the claustrophobic safety of my apartment, sealing windows and doors with makeshift barricades, setting up every camera and alarm system I could find. The tapes became my obsession, each viewing, revealing new details, hidden messages, and clues I hadn't noticed before. It was as if the killer wanted me to unravel his twisted puzzle, to walk willingly into the trap he had laid with meticulous care. The night before the fateful date, the power went out across the entire block, plunging the city into darkness. In the pitch-black silence, I heard the unmistakable sound of someone moving through my apartment, the soft shuffle of feet, the quiet click of a door handle. Panic clawed at my throat as I fumbled for my phone, the only source of light, but the battery was dead. I was trapped in a nightmare made real, every instinct screaming to run, to hide, to fight. Then a voice, low, calm, and terrifyingly close, whispered my name. It was the man from the tapes, the confession turned nightmare, the shadow stalking my every moment. The voice promised the final confession was at hand, that the story we had shared through grainy footage and whispered threats would now unfold in flesh and blood. I had no choice but to face what was coming, to step into the darkness he had created for me, knowing that whatever awaited beyond that door would change everything or end it all. As dawn approached, my resolve wavered between fear and a strange, desperate hope that somehow I might survive the final act of a horror story I never wanted to be part of. But deep down, I knew some confessions are not meant to be heard. They are meant to be lived, endured, and remembered only in the silence after the last light fades. With the fatal date looming just hours away, my entire being was consumed by a frantic need to understand what I was truly facing. A maddening puzzle of half-truths and cruel promises that twisted my reality into something unrecognizable and terrifying. I scoured every inch of my apartment for hidden clues, rewatched every tape obsessively, and transcribed every whispered word, hoping to find a way to outsmart the killer who had made me the centerpiece of his grotesque confession. But each new discovery only tightened the noose around my throat, a cryptic phrase carved into the back of one tape's label, a subtle background noise on another that sounded like a code, and a chilling pattern of dates and places that pointed to a twisted game I was forced to play. The police were involved now more seriously, but their reassurances were hollow. The reality was that this man, whoever he was, seemed to be always one step ahead, ghost-like and untouchable, orchestrating his final confession with the precision of a master puppeteer pulling the strings of my unraveling sanity. Sleep was no refuge, only a gateway to horrific dreams where I was both hunter and hunted, chased through endless corridors by that shadowy figure whose face remained obscured, yet whose presence filled every nightmare with icy dread. Friends who tried to intervene found me a shell of the person they once knew, distracted, paranoid and broken, but still clinging desperately to a flicker of hope that the story could end with survival, not silence. On the night before the date, the city's power blackout plunged me into suffocating darkness. My senses heightened to a razor's edge, every creak and whisper magnified into a thunderous roar inside my mind. Then, the sound of footsteps, soft, deliberate, and agonizingly close, echoed through my apartment, a prelude to the arrival of the man who had made me his final confession. My heart hammered against my ribs like a warning bell, my breath shallow and quick as I reached for the only weapon I had, a flashlight with fading batteries and my own fragile will to survive. The door handle slowly turned, and the shadows in the hallway seemed to stretch and pulse with unnatural life as the threshold opened to reveal a figure cloaked in darkness. His face obscured, but his voice unmistakable, calm, chilling, and filled with the satisfaction of a confession completed. He stepped inside, and the world seemed to contract around us, time folding in on itself as the final chapter of his story and mine was about to be written. The tapes, the dates, the whispered warnings, they were all part of a horrific symphony, culminating in this moment where past sins and future horrors collided in a confession that would echo through the lives of everyone who had ever known me. And as his words filled the room, I realized that the true terror was not in the killings he had committed, but in the fact that I was now an inseparable part of his legacy, a living testament to the darkness he had unleashed. The final confession was not just his, it was ours, a haunting tale of obsession, fate, and the irrevocable loss of innocence in a world where evil wears the mask of inevitability. I don't know what happened after that night, whether I survived or became another shadow in his twisted collection. But if you ever find a tape that whispers your name and promises a future you can't escape, take it as a warning. Some confessions are better left unheard, some stories better left untold, and some dates better left unmarked. Because when the clock strikes and the final confession plays, it may not just be the past coming back to haunt you, it could be the end of everything you think you know about safety, reality, and yourself. The night swallowed me whole, the city's blackout turning familiar streets into shifting shadows and whispered threats. But inside my apartment, the darkness was thicker, almost alivened. I felt the cold presence of the confession hanging heavy in the stale air. Every instinct screamed that this was the moment the tapes had been leading to. A final act scripted by a mind so twisted it could predict my every move, my every breath. I paced the cramped rooms, clutching the first tape like a fragile lifeline, yet knowing that it was also the chain binding me to a fate I desperately tried to outrun. My thoughts were a chaotic storm of fear and fragmented memories, the faces of the victims he confessed to, the silent screams behind each confession, and the sickening knowledge that I was next, the last entry in his macabre ledger. As the hours crawled forward, I caught every creak, every whisper, every subtle movement in the periphery of my vision. The killer's voice echoed in my mindmocking.com, certain promising that the final confession would be a story no one would forget. Then the knocking began, soft and rhythmic, a terrifying metronome counting down the moments to an irreversible end. My hands trembled as I edged toward the door, the cold metal of the lock burning against my skin as I unlatched it. Peering through the peephole, I saw nothing but a heavy fog settling in the hallway, swallowing the dim light and distorting everything into shapes that might have been monsters or merely shadows. I opened the door a crack, heart hammering in my chest, and the silence outside pressed against me like a living thing. Then, from the gloom, a package appeared at my feet, another tape. Another whisper from the man who haunted my days and nightmares. I brought it inside with shaking hands and pressed play. The flickering screen casting grotesque shadows on the walls as his voice filled the room once more. This time, the footage was different, intimate, terrifyingly personal. It showed me, captured in moments I thought were private, every vulnerable glance, every secret fear exposed as the killer narrated my life as if it were a script written for his pleasure. His words dripped with menace, but beneath the cruelty was an unsettling tenderness, a twisted obsession that made my skin crawl. The tape ended with the date again, closer now, an inescapable deadline etched into my psyche like a scar. In the days that followed, reality fractured completely. I couldn't distinguish waking from dreaming. The shadows lengthened and shifted. The faces of strangers blurred into his, and every whispered sound seemed to carry his voice. I barricaded myself in my apartment, but the terror seeped through the cracks under doors, through windows, into the very walls. I knew the final confession was near, and with it, the moment I would either vanish into the darkness or fight to reclaim the fragments of a life shattered by a monster's words. The date arrived with a silence so profound it screamed in my ears. Time seemed to freeze as the hour approached, each second dragging me toward a confrontation I couldn't avoid. Then the knocking came again, heavier this time, insistent and final. I opened the door, knowing that beyond it waited the man who had made me his confession, his obsession, his last story. But what happened next, I can't say for sure. The memory is a blur of fear and shadows, screams lost in the night, and a silence that followed like the closing of a tomb. If you find yourself hearing a name you didn't expect, tied to a date you haven't yet lived, beware. Some confessions are traps, some stories are curses, and some dates mark the end of innocence forever. The final confession isn't just a story told, it's a nightmare lived, a legacy of darkness that waits patiently to claim its next victim. In the days and nights that bled together after that last chilling encounter, I found myself caught in a waking nightmare where the boundaries between past, present, and future blurred into a twisted kaleidoscope of fear and hopelessness. Every shadow that flickered at the edge of my vision seemed to pulse with malevolent intent. Every whisper carried the echo of that voice, the voice that had carved my name into the dark corners of his confession, the voice that promised my fate was sealed. The tapes multiplied in my mind like a plague, each playback a torment and an obsession, and though I tried to resist, the magnetic pull of that horrifying story drew me deeper into a vortex where reality itself seemed to fray at the edges. Friends had long since drifted away, unable or unwilling to comprehend the terror that consumed me, leaving me isolated in an ever-tightening cage of paranoia. The police presence had faded to nothing. The killer remained a phantom, a ghost who danced just beyond the reach of justice, his legacy woven into the fabric of my unraveling existence. I began to see things, phantoms lurking just out of focus, faces I could not place watching from darkened windows, reflections in mirrors that didn't quite match my own. I questioned my own sanity, torn between the desperate hope that this was all some horrible delusion and the undeniable proof that it was not. And then the cursed date arrived with a silence so deep it pressed against my chest like a physical weight. Time seemed to slow to a crawl, each minute a gauntlet I had to endure, leading inexorably to the final confession's climax. I sat in my apartment, trembling, clutching the first tape as if it were a shield, waiting for whatever horror was to come. The knocking began, again louder now, more urgent, a hammering pulse that shattered the fragile quiet. I moved toward the door with a terror so raw it nearly crippled me, heart pounding in a frenzy of primal fear and reluctant acceptance. As the door swung open, the figure I had come to dread stepped inside the man who had woven his story around mine, the dark shadow whose voice had haunted my every waking moment. But this time, the confession was not a tape or a whispered, was flesh and blood, real and terrifying. His eyes held a cold amusement, as if the culmination of years of planning had come to fruition in this moment. He spoke softly, his words dripping with cruel finality, telling me that I was now part of his story forever, that the confession was complete, and that no one would ever forget what had happened. The room seemed to close in around us, time folding in on itself as the past crimes, the future horrors, and the present terror collided in a crescendo of darkness. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, it was overweathered by escape, by mercy, or by something darker, I cannot say. What remains is the echo of that night, the heavy silence that follows the last confession, and the knowledge that some stories don't end, they linger, haunting the shadows and the minds of those who survived. To tell the tale, if you ever come across a tape, a name, and a date that chill you to your core, heed the warning. Some confessions are not merely stories, they are curses, legacies of evil that reach beyond the grave to claim new victims. The final confession is not just a record of past horrors, is the promise of horrors yet to come. Since that night, my life has been a fragile echo, a shadow of what it once was, forever marked by the final confession that was never meant to be heard, never meant to claim me, but did anyway. I moved away, changed my name, tried to erase every trace of the man who made me part of his dark story, but the scars remain in the way my hands shake when the phone rings, in the cold sweat that wakes me from sleep, in the creeping paranoia that sometimes feels like a second skin. The tapes are gone now, lost or destroyed, but the memories, the voice, the date, the inescapable promise cling like a curse that no distance or time can break. I learned the hardest truth of all. Some stories don't have endings. They don't resolve neatly or fade into the past. They follow you, haunting every corner of your mind, waiting for the moment you let your guard down, ready to pull you back into the darkness. If you ever find yourself holding a confession like Mina name whispered on a tape, a date etched in your future, listen closely to that warning. Walk away if you can, run if you must, but never forget that some darkness doesn't just tell a story. It becomes your story, your nightmare, your final confession. And sometimes, the most terrifying part isn't the killer themselves, knowing that they saw you coming all along, that you were never just a bystander, but the last chapter in a book no one should ever read.